Our boy looked absolutely exhausted, with deep dark circles under his eyes and sweat dripping down his face. Something was seriously bothering him as he struggled to keep his composure. Sitting in a quiet cafe with a sketchy businessman, our boy desperately tried to find a way out of his misery. The anxiety ate at him as he asked if this deal was actually safe. Suddenly, the slick businessman slammed his hand against the table with a loud thud, completely startling our boy. The sudden outburst made him freeze right before signing the contract. Our boy questioned if he was really expected to scam his own high school friends for money. The businessman just grinned confidently, extending his hand as if offering a golden opportunity. Sweating profusely, our boy stared down at the paperwork with a heavy heart. He knew this was a terrible idea, but his desperate situation left him with almost no other options. The shady businessman kept feeding him sweet lies, claiming he only reached out separately because he cared so much about him. It was a classic manipulative trap. A painful memory flashed back, reminding him of how low his life had truly sunk. Even during his own father's funeral, he was forced to stand aside and take stressful work calls. With his spirit completely broken, our boy finally put pen to paper. He signed his name on the dotted line, sealing a deal that he would soon regret. The moment the ink dried, the businessman let his mask slip. A deeply malicious grin spread across his face as he pushed up his glasses, knowing he had successfully trapped another victim. As he dragged himself back to his dark apartment, his thoughts turned into a spiral of regret. The crushing stress was too much to bear, forcing him to rush to the bathroom. He hunched over the toilet, vomiting violently as the anxiety and cheap alcohol tore his stomach apart. His entire body trembled from the sheer exhaustion of living this miserable life. Staring blankly ahead with spit dripping from his mouth, our boy could only curse his miserable existence. He felt completely hollowed out, empty, and thoroughly defeated by the world. Stumbling back into his tiny studio apartment, he looked around at the absolute mess. Empty bottles and crumpled papers littered the floor, perfectly reflecting the chaotic disaster his life had become. Just as he was about to collapse onto his bed, something on his cluttered desk caught his attention. He paused, turning his tired eyes toward a strange book lying there. Sitting right on top of his papers was a mysterious, pitch-black book with the words "Dark Header" printed on the cover. He could not remember putting it there. Drawn by a strange and sudden impulse, our boy reached out and picked up the heavy volume. The dark cover felt unusually cold to the touch as he lifted it. He slumped onto his bed and flipped the cover open. Oddly enough, he recalled that no matter how many times he read this book, it always seemed to offer something completely new. Turning the pages quietly, our boy hoped to find a brief escape from his grim reality. For a moment, the quiet rustle of paper was the only sound in the room. Suddenly, our boy froze in absolute shock. Something completely unexpected caught his eye, causing his heart to skip a beat as he stared down at the pages in disbelief. Looking out his window, he witnessed a bizarre sight that made no sense. Glowing purple feathers were drifting gently through the night air, casting an eerie light over the silent city skyline. The strange phenomenon seemed directly connected to the book he was holding. Our protagonist looks completely bewildered as he notices black crow feathers suddenly appearing. He cannot help but wonder what kind of ominous sign this is supposed to be. Without any warning, a sharp, stabbing pain flared inside him. Our boy violently coughed up a spray of dark blood, his eyes widening in sheer terror as his vision blurred. The dark blood splattered heavily across the open pages of the book, staining the text. He gasped in shock, struggling to comprehend what was happening to his own body. A searing agony ripped through his chest, making him feel as if his heart was about to explode. He clutched his shirt, desperately gasping for a single breath of air. His vision began to warp and distort into a nightmare of colors. He desperately clawed at his mouth, but the blood kept pouring out as the unbearable agony intensified. He felt a strange, burning sensation deep inside, wondering why his heart was suddenly pulsing with such a terrifying warmth. It felt as if some dormant force was waking up. In his fading vision, the blood-soaked pages seemed to glitch and warp, humming with a dark energy that he could not explain. He realized the book itself was reacting. Collapsing onto the mattress, our boy choked out his final words, desperately crying that he could not breathe. Right beside him, the book was engulfed in thick, swirling purple smoke, reacting to his life force fading away. He lay there completely helpless as the darkness began to swallow him whole. With blood trickling from his nose and mouth, his eyes grew heavy and glazed over. The last remnants of his strength were rapidly draining, leaving him on the absolute brink of death. As his consciousness faded into the cold dark, a single bitter thought crossed his mind. He wondered if his pathetic, miserable life was really going to end in this lonely room. His limp body slumped back against the pillows, completely stained with dark blood. The book slid from his lifeless fingers, landing on the bed as the room fell dead silent. He lay there completely motionless, pale and cold as his breathing stopped entirely. It seemed his tragic struggle had reached a silent, anticlimactic end right then and there. Suddenly, the creepy businessman appeared in a dark vision, his eyes glowing with an eerie, predatory yellow light. His smug grin returned, as if he had planned this outcome all along. The mysterious presence lingered like a heavy curse, a reminder of the toxic deal our boy had signed. It was clear that this businessman was no ordinary human being. As his body lay completely cold and lifeless, dark feathers and purple smoke filled his room, matching the despair of his final moments. His inner voice bitterly lamented that his life was ending before he could accomplish a single damn thing. A sudden surge of purple energy shattered the darkness, as a bizarre magic spell took hold of our protagonist. A corrupted system notification glitched across his vision, promising a special reward and targeting a specific individual. Black feathers drifted silently through a deep blue light as he slowly regained consciousness from the brink of death. Our boy bolted upright in bed, gasping for air in a massive, unfamiliar room. He blinked in shock, realizing his dull eyes had transformed into a striking, vibrant shade of blue. Staring up at the high ceiling and its elegant chandelier, he felt something warm nudge his hand. A massive black crow was nuzzling his head, acting incredibly friendly instead of hostile. He wondered why on earth this crow was acting so affectionate as he gently held the bird on his lap. The crow flapped its wings, its sharp talons gripping his blanket as it prepared to take off. Suddenly, a whole flock of red-eyed crows burst into the air, cawing loudly as they soared out of his open window. He watched in disbelief from his bed as the birds disappeared into the dark night sky. His jaw dropped as he looked out at the night sky, seeing 3 distinct moons glowing in shades of red, blue, and yellow. Below them lay a vast, sprawling fantasy city flying a flag that matched those exact 3 celestial bodies. It hit him like a truck that he was no longer in his original world. He rushed to the window glass to check his reflection and quickly piece things together. Staring back at him was a handsome young man with sharp black hair, wearing an elegant, laced white shirt. Just as he was about to deduce his new location, a sudden knocking on his door shattered his train of thought. Panicking, our protagonist scrambled back from the window, his heart hammering against his chest. A maid peeked her head into the room, gasping in surprise at the sudden movement inside. In his rush to hide, our boy had tripped over his own feet and face-planted hard onto the carpeted floor. Seeing her master in such an embarrassing position, the flustered maid stammered that she would return later and quickly closed the door. He groaned in agony, clutching his head as a massive wave of memories flooded his brain. Sweat dripped down his face as he struggled to process the overwhelming information rushing into his mind. Everything clicked when he realized he had been transported directly into the world of Dark Header. This was a brutal dark fantasy story dominated by terrifying, ruthless tyrants and powerful, bloodthirsty conquerors. He ran a trembling hand through his dark hair, desperately trying to calm his racing thoughts. To make matters worse, he realized he had possessed the body of the Empire's 7th prince, Lan Averin. Lan Averin was a doomed extra, whose sole purpose was to die a miserable, early death in the plot. The sheer unfairness of his situation made him want to scream as he clutched his head in agony. He wept tears of absolute despair, realizing he had survived one death only to face an even worse fate. A twisted, manic laugh bubbled up in his throat at the sheer absurdity of his horrible luck. He cursed his fate repeatedly in his mind, refusing to accept this death sentence. Suddenly, a cold voice cut through the silence, as a man wearing round glasses announced himself as Sane. Lan Averin froze in sheer terror, instantly recognizing Sane as the 7th prince's incredibly calculating butler. The butler entered the room accompanied by a young maid carrying a tray of tea and bread. He calmly explained that he had heard the prince skipped dinner and came to personally check on him out of concern. The butler adjusted his glasses, his eyes sharp and completely unreadable behind the reflective lenses. Lan Averin swallowed hard, a cold sweat running down his neck as he tried to keep his composure. He repeatedly told himself to stay calm and focus on perfectly acting like the real prince. Standing tall by the table, Lan Averin offered a polite smile, which only made the butler tilt his head in confusion. Both the butler and the maid stared at him in absolute shock, clearly sensing that something was incredibly off about his behavior. The nervous maid carefully served the meal, her hands trembling as she set the plates down before Lan. Our boy noticed her extreme anxiety right away, wondering why she was acting so terrified. Sure enough, her shaky grip slipped, sending the heavy teapot tumbling right out of her hands. Lan lunged forward in a desperate attempt to catch the falling pitcher before it hit the table. Liquid splashed everywhere as the pitcher slammed onto the dark wood table and spilled all over. The poor maid gasped in horror while Lan recoiled, completely shocked by the sudden mess. Fear instantly gripped the maid, her face turning pale and her eyes widening in absolute terror. She looked as though her entire life was flashing right before her eyes. Dropping straight to her knees, she begged for mercy and frantically apologized for her clumsy mistake. Lan watched her extreme reaction in disbelief, realizing just how deep her fear ran. With her hands shaking uncontrollably, she desperately began scrubbing the spilled liquid off the table. Every single movement she made was fueled by the raw panic of someone fighting for survival. A sudden realization washed over Lan as he watched her frantic efforts to clean the spill. He finally remembered the dark reputation of the prince whose body he now inhabited. She rubbed the wood so hard her knuckles turned white, trying to erase any trace of her mistake. To her, a simple spill was a life-or-death situation. She probably envisioned the prince as a red-eyed monster demanding her execution for such a minor slip. In this harsh world, royalty held absolute power over the lives of commoners. Lan quickly turned his attention back to the silent butler, who had been watching this whole disaster unfold. He needed to act fast before this calculating secretary figured out his true identity. Holding a document tight in his hand, the glasses-wearing butler flashed a highly suspicious smile. This guy clearly had his own hidden agenda and was not here to help. He unrolled the massive scroll across the table and smoothly asked the prince to sign these budget documents. It was a bold move, presenting such critical paperwork during a messy meal. Lan stared down at the quill in his hand, his expression hardening as he read the butler's true intentions. He knew immediately that this whole situation was a load of nonsense. A quick glance at the strange symbols confirmed his suspicion that this was completely fraudulent document. The butler was trying to trick him into signing away royal funds. The smug butler stood confidently with crossed arms, acting as a mere puppet for the powerful empress scheming in the shadows. He honestly believed the prince was too foolish to notice. Lan hovered the tip of the quill over the paper, hesitating as a wave of bitter memories began to surface. He knew exactly where this path of mindless obedience would lead. The butler watched him expectantly, his face completely devoid of any real respect for the prince. He fully anticipated our boy to just sign the papers without asking any questions. A bitter taste filled Lan's mouth as he realized he was being mocked by a mere secretary. Even after possessing royalty, he was still being treated like a mindless tool. The butler did not even try to hide his disdain, letting out a loud yawn right in front of the prince. He felt completely untouchable under the protection of his hidden master. His condescending voice echoed in Lan's mind, telling His Highness that there was absolutely no need to think and to simply sign the papers. This exact phrase triggered a painful memory of Lan's past life as an overworked, hollow-eyed employee. He used to be a nobody who always followed orders without question. Back then, his hand had moved automatically, signing away his rights and his future just to survive another day. It was a miserable existence that he refused to repeat. The echoes of his past boss's voice kept ringing, demanding that he just sign the document without thinking. He remembered the creepy, grinning face of his former boss, whose eyes gleamed with pure greed. That man had exploited him to the bone while pretending to be his mentor. The memory of that suffocating corporate environment made Lan's blood run cold. He had worked himself to death for people who did not care about him at all. The dark shadows of his past mistakes threatened to pull him back into that familiar loop of powerlessness. But this time, Things were going to be very different. Anger surged through Lan as he ground his teeth, his jaw clenching with intense fury. He swore to himself that he would never let anyone manipulate him like that again. Letting out a slow, quiet sigh, he calmed his breathing and let his anger cool into a sharp, dangerous focus. The submissive pawn from his past life was officially dead. The butler kept his hands folded near his chin, his smug eyes locking onto the prince as he waited for the signature. He had no idea he was playing with fire. His mocking smile stretched even wider, confident that the useless prince would yield just like he always did. It was a grave mistake to underestimate our boy. Standing tall and arrogant, the butler towered over the table with an insufferable air of superiority. Lan looked up at him with a chilling, calm expression that should have warned him. The secretary smugly repeated his demand for the prince to sign, but before he could even finish his sentence, a heavy pitcher flew straight at his face. The maid gasped in pure shock, her eyes darting toward the sudden commotion as her heart skipped a beat. With a deafening crash, the pitcher shattered right at the butler's feet, sending sharp glass shards and spilled liquid flying everywhere, completely smashing his expensive monocle to pieces. Our boy casually watches the fallout with his hand still raised, while the arrogant secretary stands frozen in absolute shock. The poor maid is utterly terrified, covering her eyes as she tries to process this crazy sudden outburst. Lan knew the butler's threats were a complete bluff. In reality, the Empress didn't even know this lowlife existed, meaning he had absolutely zero backup. Lan calmly sits back in his chair, completely unbothered by the chaos he just caused. Meanwhile, the butler is shaking violently from head to toe as cold sweat pours down his face. Looking at his master, his eyes are wide with pure terror as he realizes he messed with the wrong royal. Lan looks down with a cold, shadowed expression. The dark circles under his eyes only make him look more intimidating in the dim light of the study. Our boy is thinking about how he used to live a miserable life being ignored by everyone and always getting the short end of the stick. A lone crow cries out under the darkening sky, matching his inner rage. He is officially done living like a peasant. The butler sweats bullets as he realizes the horrifying truth of his situation. He knows there is no way out now, and sheer panic completely takes over his face as he trembles in fear. Lan slowly extends his hand, pointing a single finger down toward the messy floor to give his next order. Surrounded by a menacing red aura, Lan looks like a straight-up demon as he issues a cold command to clean up the mess. The butler has no choice but to obey. The oppressive atmosphere in the room is suffocating, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation or excuses. Spilled liquid and shattered glass cover the floor, with the expensive gold monocle of the butler lying broken in the puddle. It is a stark reminder of his shattered pride. Lan is determined to survive this brutal world by any means necessary, no matter who he has to crush along the way. In this world, one royal family stands above everyone else like literal gods. Their word is absolute law, and nobody dares to challenge their supreme authority. Absolutely everything in existence belongs to them, from the land to the very lives of the people who serve them. They rule with complete dominance. Every single member of this legendary family possesses distinct, glowing blonde hair that marks their sacred lineage. To everyone else, they are practically divine beings, but not everyone in the palace is happy with the current status quo. One man in particular is currently seething with pure rage. This butler is absolutely furious, his face twisted in a look of complete disgust as he holds back his growing resentment. He clearly despises his current assignment. Meanwhile, our protagonist is trying to make sense of his new royal status by going over old family records. But his black hair is a constant reminder that he is completely different from his golden siblings. The butler secretly thinks of our boy as a complete coward who always walks on eggshells around the actual blonde heirs. To him, this dark-haired prince is nothing but a joke. He spent a fortune in bribes just to secure a high-ranking position in the palace. Now, he feels completely ripped off because he ended up serving the family failure. The butler can barely contain his anger as he glares toward our boy, wishing he could be serving anyone else. While our protagonist calmly sips his drink, the furious butler is forced to scrub the carpet right in front of him. A young maid stands nearby, sweating bullets as she watches the sheer tension rising in the room. This standard master and servant dynamic is about to completely shatter. Scrubbing the carpet with a rag, The butler clenches his teeth, muttering insults under his breath. He thinks his master is too weak to ever notice his true feelings of utter contempt. Suddenly, a teacup crashes onto the floor right next to him, splashing hot liquid everywhere. The butler flinches in shock, his eyes widening as his train of thought is abruptly shattered. The cup shatters with a loud sound, echoing through the silent, tense room. He stands up and turns around, fully prepared to lose his temper at this sudden disrespect. The butler expects the prince to cower like he usually does when things get tense. Instead of apologizing, our boy delivers a cold, direct order to clean it up. The atmosphere in the room instantly shifts as a heavy silence falls over them. Our protagonist glares at him with terrifying, glowing red eyes that pierce right through the soul of the butler. He coldly demands him to do it faster, leaving no room for argument. The butler completely freezes, a cold sweat breaking out across his face as he stares in absolute horror. He has never seen this side of the supposedly weak prince before. Looking away casually, our boy notes that a simple spilled cup clearly was not enough to bring this servant back to reality. He realizes he needs to make his message even clearer. He turns his attention to the young maid standing in the corner, pointing a finger directly at her. She gasps in surprise, completely terrified that she might be the next target of his sudden wrath. He threatens that if she eavesdrops on a single word of their conversation, he will have her working without her fingers. It is a brutal, terrifying warning that instantly gets her attention. This poor girl is absolutely trembling with fear under his menacing aura. She can only lower her head and pray he doesn't actually follow through with his terrifying threats. Under his terrifying gaze, she frantically nods and screams out in agreement, desperately trying to save herself from his anger. She wants absolutely nothing to do with whatever is about to happen. She immediately covers her ears with her hands, squeezing her eyes shut to prove she is not listening to a single thing. Her entire body is trembling with pure fear. With the maid successfully neutralized, our boy turns his cold, dark gaze back toward the butler. The sheer pressure radiating from him is enough to suffocate anyone in the room. The butler is now shaking, his previous arrogance completely gone as he realizes he has severely miscalculated. He is locked in place, unable to even look his master in the eye. Sweat pours down his face as his mind races to find a way out of this nightmare. He spent all that money to bribe his way here, only to realize he is dealing with a monster. Our boy is completely in control now, and the power dynamic has shifted forever. Sometime later, the same maid is outside, crouched over a large wash basin, scrubbing clothes with her hands. She is gossiping with her fellow maids about the terrifying events from earlier. The other maids laugh it off, thinking she is just exaggerating or making up stories. They have no idea how close she actually came to losing her hands in that room. They discuss how the dark-haired prince has not left his palace lately and is just staying shut inside. To the rest of the staff, he still seems like a harmless hermit, but she knows the terrifying truth, and her anxious expression shows she is still haunted by those glowing red eyes. She will never look at the prince the same way again. Meanwhile, our prince has retreated back to his peaceful library. After dealing with his problematic servants, he can finally relax and ignore all the stressful royal drama. Our boy stands by the large window, calmly holding his teacup and enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. He looks completely different from the terrifying monster he was just a moment ago. Taking a slow, relaxing sip of his tea, he enjoys the quiet warmth. It seems he finally has things under his complete control, free from any annoying palace distractions. His mind drifts back to his exhausting past life as a stressed-out student, constantly buried under massive piles of textbooks with a heavy backpack. But since he has been reborn into this luxurious royal family, he has absolutely no intention of wasting this second chance at a peaceful life. With a satisfied smile, he decides to simply relax and elegantly enjoy some free time for the foreseeable future. He has successfully put his annoying servants in their place, and now nothing stands between him and his peaceful afternoon. Standing by the window, our protagonist looks out at the beautiful clear sky and smiles, thinking to himself that the weather is absolutely perfect for a relaxing afternoon. Suddenly, a sharp pain shoots through his head like a physical blow, shattering his peaceful moment instantly. His eyes widen in complete shock as a bizarre sensation begins to overtake his entire body, leaving him gasping for air. Confused and terrified, He wonders what on earth is happening to him out of nowhere. He loses his grip entirely, and the elegant teacup slips from his hand, crashing onto the hard, tiled floor and shattering into 100 tiny pieces with a loud clatter. He desperately tries to hold onto the window frame, completely overwhelmed by the suddenness of this terrifying attack. Our boy collapses backward onto the floor, screaming in agony as a fierce heat surges through his veins, making him feel as though his entire body is burning up from the inside. He clenches his teeth, desperately struggling to endure the intense torture racking his nervous system. His vision begins to blur, and his consciousness starts to slip away into the suffocating darkness. In a final, desperate burst of awareness, his eye snaps wide open, realizing something has gone completely wrong. Hearing the sudden commotion from inside, the maid opens the door and steps in, holding her broom with a concerned expression. She looks down in surprise at the shattered pieces of the teacup scattered across the floor, wondering what could have happened to cause such a mess in the room of her master. Crouching down, she begins to carefully gather the broken ceramic shards, hoping the master is not angry about the accident. A sudden rustling sound behind her makes her stop and turn around in total surprise. A black crow with glowing red eyes suddenly swoops down out of the shadows, flapping its wings wildly. Startled by the unexpected guest, the maid drops her broom and tries to keep her distance from the frantic bird. In a panic, she reaches out and manages to catch the struggling crow securely in her hands, holding it tight. The crow, which actually carries the consciousness of our boy, looks up at her and thinks that this maid is incredibly scary when she is angry. He realizes he cannot break free from her grasp, no matter how hard he struggles with his tiny new wings. She carries the crow over to the open window, leaving our protagonist in utter confusion as he wonders what she plans to do next. With a gentle but firm look, the maid prepares to return the bird to the wild, completely unaware that she is holding the soul of her master. She tosses the black crow straight out of the high window, sending it sailing into the open sky. Our protagonist screams in absolute terror as his new bird body begins to plummet straight down from the top of the massive stone tower, falling faster and faster toward the forest below. Staring at the rapidly approaching green canopy, he panics, realizing that if he does not do something quickly, he is going to fall straight to his death. Desperate to survive, he tries to figure out how to control his new form, wondering if he just needs to flap his wings to stay afloat. He focuses all his mental energy and commands his wings to flap, screaming at himself to fly. The wind rushes past him as he struggles against gravity, trying to find his balance in mid-air. Our winged friend is desperately trying not to crash as gravity pulls him down rapidly. He screams inside his mind for his wings to finally work before he hits the ground below. His feathers catch an upward draft, and he finally feels the air pushing back against his wings. To his absolute delight, he actually starts to soar gracefully through the sky, realizing that he has successfully mastered flight in his new form. But then a sudden thought stops him cold. As night falls over the magnificent palace, a strange, mystical energy fills the air under the glowing celestial bodies. Back in his human body, our exhausted boy leans against the wall, panting heavily as he recovers from the intense strain of his successful mind transfer experiment. Sweat drips down his face as he catches his breath, realizing that keeping his mind connected to another creature takes an immense physical toll on his body. Sitting quietly on the stone ledge just outside the window, the red-eyed crow looks back in at its creator. Gripping the stone ledge tightly, the crow remains perfectly still, waiting for the next command of its master. Our boy stared at his reflection in the glass, realizing his mind connection ability was deeply tied to the mysterious power of Manny's. He knew he had to tread carefully. Standing alone in his dark, lavish quarters, our protagonist felt the weight of his new reality. Suddenly, a polite knock on the door broke the silence as a servant announced that the evening ritual was about to begin. The grand hall was absolutely massive, packed with nobles lined up on both sides of a long stone table under shimmering blue lights. This ritual was practically a succession test to find the next ruler, but as the seventh prince, our boy was not even considered a candidate. Dressed in his dark blue military uniform with a red sash, our boy took his seat at the table. He found it surreal to witness this intense event in person after only reading about it before. Across the table, the older princes in their pristine white uniforms laughed and chatted amongst themselves. They clearly looked down on everyone else in the room. Our boy kept his composure and quietly observed them, locking eyes with the obnoxious prince sitting directly in front of him. The pink-haired third prince leaned forward with a twisted, mocking smirk on his face. He openly insulted our protagonist, asking if the lowly trash had completely lost the ability to understand simple words. The arrogant prince slammed his hand on the table in frustration when our boy simply sighed and ignored his pathetic attempt at provocation. Before the hothead could cause a scene, the gorgeous first princess quietly stepped up behind him and placed her hands on his shoulders. The sudden icy presence of his sister immediately made the loudmouth break out into a cold sweat. The power dynamic at this table was intense, with the first prince, second prince, first princess, and third prince all eyeing the throne. The arrogant second prince calmly gathered the glowing blue manny's energy in his hands, confidently showcasing the legendary power unique to their magical world. Watching the display, our boy realized that constantly wielding such overwhelming power was exactly why the royal family developed such twisted and toxic personalities. An old, powerful figure with long white hair slowly entered the grand chamber, commanding the absolute attention of everyone present. The legendary emperor walked down the center of the hall, his presence so commanding that every single royal stood up and bowed in deep respect. He held glory in one hand and conviction in the other, walking toward his throne. With every heavy step he took, the ancient ruler carried the weight of a kingdom that faced absolute ruin if the succession failed. The emperor stroked his silver beard, his tired eyes reflecting decades of brutal rule. He looked down at his children, ready to begin the ultimate test of their worthiness. Approaching the grand table, the emperor placed his hand flat against the surface, unleashing a surge of blue flame like Manny's energy that flowed forward. The blue light intensified as his hand channeled the raw magical power directly into the ancient table, triggering the sacred ritual mechanism. The emperor channeled a massive stream of blue magical energy straight down the long table, unleashing an incredibly powerful force that left everyone shocked by how far the light could actually reach. Our protagonist stares intensely at the edge of the table as the blue flames begin to settle. He immediately notices something strange about this magical test and wonders if the energy was ever supposed to reach this far. Our protagonist narrowed his eyes, sensing that something about this test was fundamentally different from what he had read in the original story. The smug second prince confidently raised his hand, flashing a self-assured smile as he prepared to go first and show off his superior power. Our boy watched him silently, waiting to see how the ritual would react to the second prince. The second prince stepped forward, completely bathed in the glowing blue aura. He looked incredibly proud, fully expecting to claim his rightful place as the favored successor. Suddenly, his smug expression shattered. His eyes widened in pure terror as a sudden, agonizing pain gripped his entire body. The prince began violently choking, coughing up dark blood as a sinister energy completely overwhelmed him. His screams of agony echoed through the silent hall. Everyone gasped in horror as our boy stood up from his chair in complete shock. This was definitely not supposed to happen during the succession ritual. The second prince clutched his face as blood began pouring from his eyes, nose, and mouth, his life rapidly slipping away in front of his horrified family. He collapsed onto the glowing table, spewing blood from his entire body. The ritual had instantly turned into a horrific crime scene. With the shocking death of a royal prince, the peaceful prologue was officially over, and the main story had finally begun. In a terrifying vision of the future, our protagonist sees the devastating water magic of the Empire's elite, a force capable of drowning entire armies. Opposing that freezing water is a roaring flame of equal destruction. Two absolute forces have dominated the Empire, leaving ordinary people completely helpless in their wake. Suddenly, a high-ranking official coughs up blood and collapses right in the middle of a grand palace hall. Our protagonist watches from the back, completely stunned by this unexpected tragedy. He realizes that a massive conspiracy is unfolding right before his eyes. The shadows of the imperial court are far deeper than he ever imagined. His mind races as he tries to figure out how this chaotic palace became such a deadly trap. An ethereal white bird suddenly glows with intense spiritual energy, signaling that a hidden power has awakened. This mysterious creature seems to hold the key to surviving the coming storm. Our boy snaps awake, cold sweat dripping down his face as he processes the shocking revelation. It was a vision, and now he knows exactly what he has to do. An expensive golden hookah shatters into pieces mid-air right in front of him. Our protagonist does not even flinch, standing perfectly calm as the shards rain down. The blonde prince stares at him with a wild, venomous grin, completely shocked that some random intruder just bypassed his entire security detail. Our boy just smiles back with total confidence. He mockingly asks the prince if he really failed to notice him until he spoke, pointing out how incredibly easy it was to slip straight into the bedchamber of the next emperor. Glass shatters across the floor as the events shift to the previous evening. The prince was spiraling out of control, venting his rage in secret. The prince punches his own reflection in absolute fury, cracking the heavy mirror. Yesterday was supposed to be a normal day of triumph, but his failing health was rapidly catching up to him. His fist glows with a sudden burst of magical energy as he desperately tries to ignore the weakness creeping into his body. He refuses to show any vulnerability, but his body betrays him anyway as he drops to his knees, hacking up blood into his trembling hands. The poison eating away at him from the inside is growing stronger. Thick, dark blood drips slowly onto the polished floorboards. He realizes that his time is running out much faster than he planned. Staring at his stained palm, his eyes go wide with absolute horror. He desperately tries to convince himself that this is not actually happening to him. He stumbles backward, his legs shaking violently under the immense weight of the lethal toxin. The proud next emperor is reduced to a pathetic, trembling mess. Clutching the golden pipe, he insists to himself that he is completely different from the regular bugs who die so easily. His pride will not let him accept defeat. He sits back on his luxurious sofa and takes a deep breath of smoke, hoping that some brief rest will allow his internal energy to stabilize. But his desperate hope is about to be shattered. Suddenly, he senses a shadow in the room and hurls the heavy golden hookah at the mysterious intruder with everything he has left. The projectile shatters into harmless pieces before it can even touch our protagonist. Our boy just stands there, completely unbothered by the pathetic attack. The prince grinds his teeth in anger, his arrogance masking the sheer panic of being confronted by an assassin while at his absolute weakest. Our protagonist calmly repeats his mockery, asking the prince if he really did not notice an intruder standing right next to him. He highlights the absolute embarrassment of the prince being so helpless. The prince backs away toward his sofa, maintaining a defensive stance as our protagonist stands casually in the center of the room. The power dynamic has completely flipped. As the rain pours outside the high tower, our boy coolly tells the prince that it does not really matter whether he believes the truth or not. The reality of the situation remains unchanged. He explains that the royal physicians probably claimed there was nothing wrong with the prince, hiding the true nature of his condition to keep him docile. The blonde prince scoffs, a twisted and bitter smirk creeping onto his face as he listens to the bold accusations of the intruder. He throws his head back and laughs maniacally, using a classic royal coping mechanism to hide his intense fear from the intruder. Our protagonist just stands there, completely unmoved by the dramatic outburst. He simply waits for the fool to finish his desperate display. With a completely flat, unimpressed expression, our boy watches the laughing noble. He has seen enough of these arrogant elites to know exactly how they react when cornered. The prince accuses the intruder of slipping him poison, just to use the antidote as a bargaining chip for his life. His grin turns absolutely feral as he grips his neck, demanding to know if the intruder thinks he can blackmail his way into surviving after he officially becomes the emperor. Our protagonist stays completely calm as the desperate noble takes a threatening step forward, raising a hand to strike. The tension in the quiet room is ready to snap. Instead of flinching, our boy prepares to completely shatter the proud prince's delusions with a brutal and cold dose of reality. The prince lunges forward with his hand outstretched, determined to crush the intruder and reclaim his pride before he loses everything. Without even bothering to dodge, our boy casually slips past the pathetic attack to claim the best seat in the room. He casually drops onto the luxurious sofa and crosses his legs, showing absolutely zero fear in front of the next emperor. He mockingly explains that the prince is going to end up dying painfully, with blood pouring out of his entire body. The prince can only stand there in utter disbelief as his world crumbles. He lets the terrifying reality of his words sink in, giving the prince a moment to realize just how helpless he is. With a chilling smile, our boy stares right at him, completely enjoying the sight of the proud noble breaking down. The blonde prince looks completely horrified as sweat runs down his pale face and blood drips from his mouth. He realizes he has been completely cornered by someone he thought was beneath him. All his pride vanishes in an instant, replaced by pure terror. Dark rain pours down on the city as a lone black raven cuts through the stormy sky. Its sharp cries echo through the heavy night air as a dark omen of what is to come. Back inside the dark room, the defeated prince slumps onto the cold floor in complete despair. He clutches his head as the reality of his tragic fate finally sets in, surrounded by ruins of his former glory. The blackbird glides over the massive spires of the royal palace, soaring through the relentless downpour. It watches the grand estate from above, a silent witness to the hidden corruption within. As the raven flies, a sudden realization strikes. Since the protagonist is already out of his confinement, he begins to calculate his next move in this dangerous game of survival. The bird passes over a bright light, leaving the darkness behind as a new plan begins to form. The raven continues its flight across the vast city as the heavy rain washes over the rooftops. Far below, the citizens sleep, completely unaware of the massive power shift happening right inside the royal palace. Our protagonist knows that every single decision from this point on will change the future. Outside the heavy wooden doors of the royal chamber, a maid stands nervously. She has been told that the prince has not touched any food for 2 whole days, and everyone is starting to panic. She imagines the worst-case scenario where she gets blamed for the death of a royal. In her mind, she is already tied up and facing the death penalty just for failing her simple duty. The sheer terror of this thought makes her break out in a cold sweat. She grits her teeth, trembling as she prepares to face whatever monster is behind those doors. Suddenly, a loud knock echoes through the hallway as she musters up the courage to get a response from the silent room. The massive doors swing open, revealing our protagonist standing there completely calm. The sudden movement startles the maid, causing her to lose her balance and tumble forward, sending her tray flying into the air. Our boy just looks down, wondering what all the noise is about. She crashes face first onto the hard floor as the bowl of soup spills everywhere. It is a complete disaster, and she lies there utterly humiliated in front of her lord. Our boy simply stares at the mess, totally unbothered by her clumsy entrance. To make matters worse, the red soup splatters right onto our boy's boot. The maid looks up, her face turning pale as she realizes she just ruined the pristine footwear of a royal. Our protagonist just stares down at her with a blank, unreadable expression. He does not yell or get angry, which somehow makes the situation 10 times more terrifying for the poor maid. Sobbing hysterically, the maid trembles on the floor as she begs for forgiveness after making a massive mistake. She expects the absolute worst punishment from him right now, but he just stands there observing her. Instead of accepting her apologies, our protagonist coldly reminds her that making such a noisy scene is already bad enough. Spilling his dinner on his boots just makes things 10 times worse, leaving her completely frozen in panic. He asks her if she plans to take full responsibility for this massive mess. His sharp, amber eyes narrow as he looks down at her, putting immense pressure on her with just a single glance. She stammers out terrified reply, agreeing to take responsibility because she is too scared to say anything else. Without another word, our boy turns around and walks away, leaving her to clean up the mess on her hands and knees. He has much bigger things to worry about than spilled soup, and his mind is already focused on his upcoming plans. The maid can only sigh in relief as he departs. Inside the chamber, piles of heavy books are scattered all over the floor, showing how much research and planning has been going on behind closed doors. An open window lets the cool forest air breeze into the room. Marks on the windowsill suggest someone recently made a quick exit, slipping out unnoticed into the vast woods. Meanwhile, rumors begin to spread like wildfire through the noble circles. The first prince looks incredibly tense as he hears the whispers about the unexpected moves being made in the shadows. The first prince kneels before the towering emperor, begging him to move up the date of the royal hunting competition. The old ruler stands tall in his grand fur coat, listening to his son's desperate plea with a cold, unreadable expression. It is clear that political schemes are already in motion. Our protagonist rides a sleek black horse under the bright blue sky, looking exceptionally noble in his dark uniform. He appears completely calm, ready to face whatever challenges await him in the hunting grounds. The massive gates of the palace swing open, and a grand army of armored knights on horseback charges out onto the lush green fields. The royal hunting competition has officially begun, and our boy notes that if he is lucky, he can use this event to his absolute advantage. Nearby, a certain blonde noble sports a smug, sinister grin. He thinks everything is going exactly according to his plan, completely unaware of the trap that has already been set for him. As they ride together, our boy feels a slight wave of anxiety. He remembers that this event is taking place a whole year before the original story actually begins, meaning the timeline is already shifting. He rides ahead with absolute confidence, leaving the frustrated blonde prince staring at his back. Our protagonist is not about to let anyone stand in his way as he carves out his own path to power. Our boy glides forward on a majestic black horse, looking completely in his element. The onlookers can only whisper in astonishment, noting that the seventh prince seems to have quite a knack for handling beasts. He does not let their chatter distract him for even a single second. With a completely calm and focused expression, our protagonist looks ahead, ignoring any background noise. He is fully prepared for whatever challenges lie ahead in this upcoming event. The path ahead leads straight to the entrance of the dangerous imperial forest. As he trots forward, a massive stone monument looms in the distance, marking the start of this grueling trial. Rising high into the sky, a massive stone monument stands as the landmark for the ceremony. This giant rock structure represents the peak of the empire, serving as the backdrop for the grand display of strength that is about to unfold. Our boy dismounts with effortless grace, tossing his cape aside with a confident grin. He is more than ready to show everyone exactly why they should not underestimate him. The emperor stands tall, sporting a massive fur-lined collar and a long white beard. He holds the reins of his horse with an imposing grip, watching the scene unfold with sharp eyes that demand absolute respect from everyone present. The blonde prince lowers his head respectfully, assuring the emperor that his wishes will be carried out. Even with his polite words, the underlying tension in the air is hard to ignore. Adjusting his elegant white coat, the proud blonde prince prepares to step forward. He carries himself with the posture of someone who expects nothing less than absolute victory. Another noble reminds him that he is basically guaranteed to take the crown today anyway. The blonde prince barely looks back, his mind already set on the prize ahead. With the entire crowd of nobles watching his every step, the blonde prince marches up the stone stairs toward the golden altar. This ritual is meant to be a grand demonstration of the overwhelming power of the royal family. Among the crowd, the nobles begin whispering to each other, passing around rumors of a highly unfortunate incident that recently took place. The hushed gossip spreads like wildfire. Suddenly, a wave of cold realization washes over the blonde prince, and his face twists into a scowl. He curses his own stupidity, completely furious that he actually listened to the words of that useless bug. The sudden shift in his demeanor catches everyone off guard. Our boy watches the spectacle from a safe distance, a tiny, devious smirk pulling at the corner of his lips. He knew exactly how this would play out. Flames of bright blue magic erupt around the blonde prince as he realizes he has been completely set up. He grits his teeth in pure, unadulterated anger, realizing too late that his rival played him like a fiddle from the very beginning. While everyone else stands completely stiff with anxiety, our protagonist keeps a cool and relaxed demeanor. He smiles gently, watching the chaos unfold with absolute satisfaction, knowing his plan is working out even better than he originally anticipated. The blonde prince is pushed straight over the edge, his eyes glowing with golden magic as raw rage completely consumes him. He is left staring in utter disbelief at the trap he walked right into, unable to hide the fury burning inside. The dark night sky set the stage for a conflict that would shake the very foundations of the empire. Out on the field, Prince Aberon unleashed a terrifying display of magical power that left the entire crowd completely breathless. This guy was showing off his absolute dominance right from the start. Sharp blades of blue energy sliced through the wind with blinding speed, tearing the atmosphere apart with raw elemental force. The violent shockwaves hammered against the ground as the magical pressure continued to build to an unbearable level. One unlucky soldier got blasted back by the impact, prompting others to scream out in terror, warning everyone to stay clear of the massive vortex. Amidst all the chaos, our protagonist stood perfectly still, watching the flashy display with a cool and calculated look in his eyes. Aberon glared forward with glowing eyes, his face twisting in rage as he prepared to push his power even further. Blood dripped from his mouth as he roared his own name, refusing to let anyone stand in his way. He screamed that he was the one destined to be the emperor, unleashing a concentrated sphere of pure magical energy directly from his palm. He unleashes an absolutely massive burst of blue energy that erupts all around him, shaping itself into ferocious spirit beasts. The raw power of this explosion shakes the entire area as his magical aura completely dominates the battlefield. As the giant beast dissolved, glowing blue embers rained down from the sky like a mystical storm, leaving the observers in absolute awe of the spectacle. The onlookers stood frozen in the pouring rain, completely speechless after witnessing such an overwhelming display of royal authority. Even the seasoned veteran commander watching from the sidelines could not hide his tense expression as the rain poured down. Suddenly, a blonde soldier broke the silence, raising his fist to lead the crowd in a loud cheer for the display of power. Meanwhile, a quiet memory surfaced of a strange command to hold a rock and pour out polluted magic. Back in a private room, our protagonist held out a simple dark stone to Aberon, who looked incredibly insulted by the gesture. Aberon barked back, demanding to know if he was being mocked with such a pathetic-looking rock. Our boy simply smiled and explained that this special stone was capable of absorbing the toxic magic currently poisoning his body. He casually added that if Aberon did not want the treatment, he was perfectly welcome to just die instead. Talk about cold. Our protagonist made it clear he had no desire to save someone against their will, leaving Aberon trembling in pure, helpless frustration. Back in the present, the seventh prince rode calmly on his horse, completely unbothered by the high stakes of the upcoming competition. One of his servants struggled to catch up, desperately calling out to the prince while carrying a massive, heavy pack on his back. Panting heavily, the servant reported that he had brought the heavy bag exactly as instructed, though he looked like he was about to collapse. Our protagonist turned his head with a sharp, intense gaze, his eyes narrowing as he focused on the task at hand. He sternly questioned the servant, confirming if the contents of the bag remained completely untouched and unaltered. Sweating profusely, the servant nervously warned the prince that the horse he was riding was notoriously wild and had injured many people. The servant silently admitted to himself that he had purposefully given this dangerous beast to the seventh prince to cause trouble. At the front of the field, the legendary emperor stood with a solemn expression, raising his hand to silence the massive gathering. With a single grand announcement, the highly anticipated royal hunting competition was officially declared open, and the crowd erupted in a frenzy of excitement. As the competitors charged forward, spectators gossiped among themselves, confident that the royal family would easily dominate the competition once again. Sitting comfortably atop his wild mount, our protagonist let out a soft smirk, fully aware of the schemes happening behind his back. The veteran commander kept his sharp eyes fixed on the field, analyzing every movement of the participants with calculated precision. Meanwhile, the devious glasses servant wore a smug grin, believing his trap for the prince was going to succeed perfectly. Walking alongside the servant, the veteran commander noted that the emperor seemed intent on using this competition to crush the pride of the nobility. As the commander walked away, the servant could only watch in silence, trying to keep his composure despite the overwhelming pressure in the air. He casually tells the trembling servant to relax, explaining that these pampered nobles are nothing more than helpless pigs lined up for the slaughter. Meanwhile, our protagonist charged into the imperial forest on his wild black steed, determined to secure a strong lead right away. This massive hunting ground was divided into 3 distinct zones, each presenting its own level of danger and unique challenges for the eager participants. Looking down at his map, he analyzed the layout of the 3 areas marked as small, medium, and large. If he wanted to win this thing, he had to navigate these regions perfectly. His mind drifted back to the ancient tales of the Empire. He recalled the absolute devotion of the knights who knelt before the legendary white-haired emperor, swearing their eternal loyalty to the crown. It was a legacy of absolute submission, one that had been drilled into the soldiers for generations. He was determined not to let those old traditions hold him back today. A majestic bird soared high above the dense forest canopy, looking down at the massive hunting grounds. Up there in the sky, everything seemed peaceful, completely detached from the chaos brewing below. He smiled to himself as he studied the parchment one last time. He calculated the path ahead and figured out that his destination had to be right by the lakeside in the southwest. With his target locked in, our boy let out a cheerful grin and picked up the pace. He was feeling pretty confident about his plan, completely unaware of what was about to happen. He held onto a massive, heavy sack packed tightly with supplies. He had spent so much time worrying about whether he brought enough gear that he did not consider other problems. Suddenly, the horse whinnied loudly and dug its hooves into the dirt, kicking up a massive cloud of dust as it came to a complete halt. Our boy was nearly thrown off by the sudden stop. He grabbed the reins tightly, trying to figure out why his mount decided to stop moving all of a sudden. He hopped down from the saddle, his heavy boot landing firmly on the soft green grass. It was time to deal with this stubborn animal face to face. The black horse aggressively shook its head back and forth, refusing to take even a single step forward. Our protagonist could only stand there, completely baffled by this sudden rebellion. No matter how much he coaxed it, the stubborn beast kept shaking its head in absolute defiance. It seemed like the animal had completely checked out and had no intention of cooperating. A single drop of sweat rolled down his face as he stared at the horse. He was starting to realize that his grand plan was hitting a major roadblock before it even started. Standing in the middle of the quiet forest, he began to wonder if the heavy sack of supplies on the saddle was just too much for the animal to carry. It was the only logical explanation for this sudden strike. Gritting his teeth, he grabbed the leather straps and pulled with all his might, shouting at the horse to get moving. He did not have time to waste standing around. The horse snorted loudly right in his face, blowing air as if to mock him. Talk about an absolute betrayal by a horse. Losing his temper, he threatened to have the stable master starve the beast if it kept acting so arrogant. But the horse did not care. It bucked, broke free, and bolted down the forest path at full speed. Our boy was left standing there in absolute shock, holding nothing but empty reins as his horse galloped away. He stood frozen in place, watching the dust settle as his horse disappeared into the green horizon. He was completely stranded in the middle of nowhere without a ride. The silence in the forest was deafening. He stared in absolute disbelief, his brain struggling to process the fact that he had just been ditched by his own mount. The bright midday sun shone down through the leaves, illuminating the empty forest road. It was a beautiful day, except for the fact that he was now forced to walk. Somewhere else in the forest, the veteran commander was walking alongside his young servant, Tolan. The poor kid was carrying a massive backpack that looked twice his size. The commander looked incredibly grave, his mind weighed down by the heavy secrets of the Empire. He knew the true nature of the power they served. Despite the heavy load on his back, Tolan offered a bright, innocent smile. He was completely oblivious to the dark thoughts running through his master's head. A bloody memory flashed of the brutal reality of imperial power. A gold-armored knight stood victoriously over his fallen foe, his massive blade dripping with fresh blood. The commander broke the silence, asking Tolan if he had ever seen the royal family up close. The young servant looked up, admitted he had only heard rumors. Parting the dense branches ahead, the commander looked back with a warning in his eyes. He told Tolan that he would only truly understand their terrifying presence once he faced them directly. The commander recalled his own youth, back when his family had protected the Empire for 1,000 years. He remembered looking out the carriage window at the grand capital. The streets were beautiful, showcasing the absolute majesty of the imperial city they were sworn to defend. Inside the carriage, his father had placed a warm hand on his shoulder. His father explained that he was growing old, and it would soon be time for his son to take his place. He told him to always be proud of their loyalty to the crown, and the boy readily agreed. The father eagerly calls out to his son, telling him to look out the window. He proudly reveals that the massive convoy passing by is actually their own family's merchant group. Leaning toward the window, his father proudly explained that their family business was responsible for supplying goods directly to the imperial household. It was a massive honor that brought immense prestige. The young boy stared out with wide, excited eyes, feeling incredibly proud of his heritage. But that peaceful moment of pride was suddenly shattered. The carriage jolted violently, catching both of them off guard as a loud commotion echoed from the street outside. Flinging the carriage door open, his father demanded to know what on earth was going on. The terrified groom was struggling to hold back a panicked horse. He desperately apologized to his lord, explaining that something had gone terribly wrong on the road ahead. The groom begged his master to please get back inside the carriage where it was safe. The situation on the street was quickly spiraling out of control. The groom assured his master that he would handle the cleanup himself. A dead vagrant lay lifeless on the cold stone street, their body battered and bruised. Standing over the grim scene was a powerful noble man, looking down with a heavy and deeply troubled expression. Blood slowly dripped from the heavy wooden wheel of a nearby carriage, staining the cobblestones below. The dark red pool spread quickly, showing just how violent the incident had been. A local guard explained that the victim appeared to be nothing more than a common vagrant from around the area. The noble man looked deeply concerned, as he learned the vagrant was caught trying to steal sacred imperial tributes from the temple. He stared down, noting that such desperate acts of theft had become far too common in this troubled region lately. It was a harsh reality that people had unfortunately grown used to seeing on these streets day after day. Inside the carriage, the young noble boy peeked out with wide, innocent eyes, asking his father what was happening and begging to be let outside to see too. The father immediately roared in a booming voice, commanding the young boy to stay inside and not dare to look. The sudden shout startled the boy, leaving him frozen in fear as cold sweat rolled down his cheek. He timidly called out to his father, completely confused by the sudden anger and the dark shadow looming over him. A stern warning echoed in his mind, making it absolutely clear that he was forbidden from ever going near the incinerator. Duke Fetus stood deep in the quiet forest, looking up at the sunlight filtering through the trees, wondering how a kid who wasn't even 10 years old yet could already be caught up in such dangerous matters. His mind drifted back to the grim reality of the imperial incinerator and the dark secrets hidden within this empire. Suddenly, his blue-haired aide, carrying a massive backpack, shouted out, reminding the Duke that they did not have the luxury of standing around admiring the scenery. The Duke offered a calm, knowing smile as he slowly turned to face his anxious companion. Meanwhile, our protagonist was huffing and puffing as he struggled to haul a massive pack of heavy stones through the thick brush. The sheer weight was crushing, forcing our boy to grit his teeth as he pushed through the agonizing physical strain. He recalled exploring this exact forest in his crow form, but realized that even this supposedly safe zone for small animals was proving to be incredibly dangerous on foot. Suddenly, a sharp rustling sound echoed from the thick bushes nearby, signaling that something was quickly approaching. Our boy froze in regret, cursing himself for being too lazy to bring even a basic weapon along for defense. Without hesitation, our main character chucks one of his heavy stones directly at the noise, catching the Duke's poor aide completely off guard as the projectile comes screaming out of nowhere. There was absolutely no time to dodge, as the heavy rock closed the distance in a split second. It connected with a brutal smash, striking the unsuspecting aide directly in the face and sending him screaming backward as his glasses shattered into pieces. Our protagonist gasped in pure horror as he realized exactly what he had just done. He quickly scrambled down into the bushes to hide, watching from below as the powerful Duke rushed up the path to check on his fallen ally. Peeking through the leaves, our boy recognized the unconscious, bleeding target as the personal aide of Duke Fetus, realizing he had just knocked out a major political player. He panicked, realizing that running into the terrifying Duke like this was the absolute worst-case scenario. Clutching another rock in his trembling hands, our boy broke into a cold sweat as his heart hammered against his ribs. He desperately tried to quiet his breathing, hoping against hope that he would not be discovered. With an attacker hiding nearby, the formidable Duke draws his sword, ready to slice down whoever dared to ambush them. With every step he took through the grass, the sheer pressure of his presence became almost suffocating. The Duke stared down with a cold, piercing gaze, looking like an absolute demon ready to strike down anyone foolish enough to cross his path. Our boy remembered that in the original novel, this very man was destined to become the personal teacher of the main protagonist, a legendary figure destined to one day train the warrior who would turn the entire empire completely upside down. Our boy was in a massive pinch, hiding behind a thick tree in the middle of a dense forest. Just a few feet away, the intimidating Duke was calling out for him while searching the area with a drawn sword. The prince held his breath, terrified that even a single peep would give away his position. Earlier, our protagonist stood tall while holding a dead beast by its hind leg. The powerful Duke knelt right before him, showing deep respect to the young royal despite the strange situation. The Duke was deeply suspicious of the heavy backpack that had been left behind. He wondered why anyone would carry a bag completely stuffed with heavy, useless river stones during a hunt. Back in the present, the prince was losing his mind trying to figure out his next move. One wrong step now meant absolute disaster, and he had zero room for error. Agony Fetus examined one of the fallen black stones closely on the forest floor. He realized this was no ordinary pebble, noting that its sheer weight was incredibly unusual for its size. He began connecting the dots, realizing this strange trickery had to be part of a plan. His thoughts immediately drifted to a young soldier named Tolan, wondering if he was the target. Nearby, poor Tolan was writhing on the grass, gritting his teeth in sheer agony. He could barely gasp out the Duke's name as his entire body trembled from a mysterious, painful attack. Hearing the cry, the Duke whipped his head around with wide, alarmed eyes. He realized the danger was much closer than he originally anticipated. Our protagonist tried to keep his composure, reminding himself of his royal status. He was the 7th prince, so he could not just break down and panic like a commoner. Tolan was pale as a ghost, staring blankly ahead as sweat poured down his dirt-stained face. He looked like a man who had just stared directly into the eyes of death itself. The pressure was getting to our boy, and his internal monologue was basically just pure screaming at this point. He was completely out of options and desperately searching for a way to escape this mess before the Duke turned his blade on him. A thin line of fresh blood trickled down the side of the collapsed soldier's neck. The wound looked clean and precise, proving that whoever did this was cold, calculated killer. Everything had gone down in the blink of an eye, leaving the Duke standing alone with his drawn sword next to the fallen soldier. He had to figure out what happened instantly. Suddenly, a sharp, rustling sound echoed through the nearby bushes, immediately catching the Duke's attention. He snapped his head toward the noise, his sharp eyes narrowing as he realized the culprit was trying to make a break for it right under his nose. Seizing the absolute perfect distraction, our boy bolted into a dead sprint with a heavy bag strapped to his back. He knew this was his only chance to escape, and he ran like his life depended on it. The Duke was not about to let him walk away that easily and charged forward with insane speed. He yelled out for the runner to halt, his heavy boots tearing through the forest undergrowth. The pursuit was officially on as both of them dashed through the dense foliage. The sound of snapping twigs and heavy footsteps echoed wildly through the otherwise silent woods. Our protagonist was huffing and puffing, his lungs burning as he pushed his physical limits. Carrying that massive backpack was making the escape attempt 10 times harder than it should have been. The prince pushed his physical limits to escape, but shaking off his pursuer was proving to be a nightmare. He expected to lose the old man quickly, but the Duke kept up with terrifying speed. Agony Fetus was closing the distance like an absolute demon, his eyes locked onto his target. He moved with a level of speed and ferocity that did not seem humanly possible. With his hand gripped tightly around the hilt of his massive sword, the Duke pushed forward. He was determined to end this chase once and for all. The distance between them was shrinking way too fast on the narrow dirt trail. Agony Fetus bellowed out that no one could ever shake him off, while our boy looked back in sheer terror, realizing he was about to get caught in a matter of seconds. Feeling the pressure mount, he seriously contemplates ditching his heavy luggage so he can transform into a crow and fly away. He desperately wishes his trusty black horse was here to carry him out of this exhausting chase, instead of relying on his own 2 feet. But ditching the bag was not a real option, so he decided to try something else. He focused all his energy down into his legs, hoping to push his human speed past its natural limits. Suddenly, a strange, golden magical energy began to swirl around his boots. The power surged through his muscles, preparing him for an unnatural burst of speed. The forest around him started to blur as the magical boost kicked in. He felt his body becoming lighter, ready to launch forward like a rocket. With a sudden pop of energy, he broke the sound barrier, leaving nothing but a streak of light behind him. He shot forward with such incredible velocity that the trees on either side became a complete wash of green. The sheer force of his movement kicked up a massive gust of wind. The Duke was left eating dust, his eyes nearly popping out of his skull in sheer disbelief. He thought he had the prince cornered, but the boy had somehow managed to tap into an unbelievable burst of speed that defied all logic. Pushing himself to the absolute limit, Agony Fetus finally burst out of the thick tree line and slid into an open meadow. He swung his sword around to defend against any sudden ambush, but the surrounding quiet field was completely devoid of life. There was absolutely nobody there. He stood in the middle of a massive, empty field dotted with old tree stumps, looking around in absolute bafflement. There was not a single soul in sight, and his target had vanished into thin air without leaving a single trace behind him. Meanwhile, our boy was floating in a state of confusion, noticing that his body suddenly felt incredibly light. He wondered if his panic had triggered his crow transformation once again. But instead of wings, a powerful set of 4 black legs was tearing across the grassy plain. He had actually managed to transform himself into a majestic, jet-black stallion. Galloping at breakneck speed, the newly transformed prince felt the wind rushing through his dark mane. This form was exactly what he needed to put some real distance between himself and the Duke. Meanwhile, in another part of the forest, a pair of imperial soldiers had just finished their own successful hunt. They proudly walked over to inspect their massive prey, thrilled that their plan went perfectly. The golden-haired soldier smirks, feeling completely confident in his success and thinking he has everything under control. Standing before the massive carcass of a defeated forest beast, the 2 blonde soldiers celebrate their successful hunt. This major victory could secure their future in the Empire, and they know it. They discuss their next move, completely sure that their actions will catch the attention of the highest powers. One of them wonders if the Emperor himself will reward their efforts for bringing down such a dangerous creature. With a dark, sinister grin, he boasts about having exactly what is needed to make their grand plan succeed. Meanwhile, our prince is slumped against a massive tree deep in the forest, completely exhausted from his frantic escape. He lets out a heavy sigh as the weight of his desperate situation finally hits him. As he hangs his head in despair, a sudden realization of his massive mistake starts to creep in. Overwhelmed by his terrible luck, he buries his face in his hands to keep himself from having a total mental breakdown. The sheer weight of his mistakes is starting to crush his spirit as he tries to find a moment of peace to quiet his racing thoughts. It turns out he lost the critical bag while fleeing for his life, leaving him with absolutely nothing to show for his escape. He throws a complete tantrum on the forest floor, rolling around on the grass in absolute agony over how horribly everything went. He screams at the sky in pure frustration, feeling like there is a limit to how many things can possibly go wrong in one day. Staring up at the canopy, tears of absolute frustration well up in his eyes as he lies there feeling totally helpless. But he quickly realizes that crying and agonizing over his massive blunder is not going to change his grim reality. Suddenly, a young green-haired boy hiding behind a tree looks completely startled, his face covered in dirt and scratches. A stern, scarred veteran commander stands over the boy, sheathing his sword while asking if he has recovered enough to move. The old soldier pauses, his tough expression softening slightly as he prepares to address the frightened boy. Right next to them sits heavy backpack stuffed to the brim with mysterious dark stones that they apparently gathered. The green-haired boy drops to his knees, clutching the bag and desperately asking why things had to happen this way. Watching this unfold from the shadows, our prince gulps nervously, realizing he just stumbled upon a very tense situation. He decides to step out of hiding, immediately drawing the attention of both the commander and the young boy, who freeze in surprise. Pointing directly at them, our boy commands their attention, making the young kid gasp out in sudden recognition. Recognizing him as the 7th prince, both the seasoned commander and the boy immediately drop to their knees to show respect. They lowers their heads low to the dirt, showing complete submission to royal authority despite the random forest location. Our boy looks down at them with a mixture of internal panic and intense pressure, trying his best to look like a dignified royal. The commander looks up with wide, sweating eyes as he anxiously waits to see how the prince will react to their presence. He opens his mouth, his voice turning incredibly cold as he delivers a shocking declaration. Standing tall, our prince casually demands that they get their wrists cut off as punishment for their actions. The silence in the forest is absolutely deafening as the two kneeling figures process his terrifying and brutal command. The young green-haired boy looks up, utterly petrified as his life flashes before his eyes under the prince's cold gaze. Without giving them a single second to react, the prince suddenly charges forward with explosive speed, closing the distance instantly before they can even think of defending themselves. Seeing his perfect chance, our prince moves with blinding speed. He lunges forward and grabs both the commander and the kid by their heads before they can even register his movement. He tightens his grip on their hair with absolute force, making sure they cannot escape his hold. He stares directly into the terrified boy's face, holding him tightly while preparing to deliver his final judgment. The green-haired kid is shaking violently, unable to comprehend the overwhelming power and speed of the prince standing before him. His pupil shrinks to a tiny point in pure, unadulterated terror as he stares directly into the abyss of his own demise. Our protagonist stands alongside the veteran general with a casual, almost mocking smile. The old soldier remains silent, carrying a heavy burden of thoughts he cannot easily voice. The grim memory of a dying child left on the cold stone floor flashes through the general's mind. He remembers the brutal reality of serving a master who views resides as entirely disposable. A vein throbs on the old general's temple as pure rage and frustration simmer just beneath his hardened exterior. He refuses to let history repeat itself under his watch. The general remembers his past young subordinate, another innocent soul who was turned into nothing but a brainwashed tool for the ruthless royal family. Our boy casually reaches down and grabs the heavy leather straps of a bag filled to the brim with crushing stones. An oppressive, menacing aura radiates from our protagonist as his eyes glow with a chilling intensity. He has absolutely no intention of playing nice today. He effortlessly slings the heavy weight over his shoulder, a silent demonstration of physical dominance that leaves no room for negotiation. A single, thunderous question echoes in the silence, demanding absolute submission from everyone present. Cold sweat drips down the old general's face as he stands strapped with the crushing weight of the heavy stones, forced to endure the humiliation. His stern gaze remains fixed ahead, his pride utterly shattered but his spirit refusing to break under the immense pressure. Turning around with a cheerful grin, our protagonist casually waves goodbye and wishes them a fun time hunting in the woods. Behind him, the general stands frozen while the battered kid can only kneel in silence, completely powerless to stop the departing prince. As he walks away, his warm expression instantly vanishes into a cold, calculating look. He briefly thinks to himself that he actually feels a bit sorry for their pathetic situation. Back in the clearing, the green-haired kid remains on his knees in absolute defeat. Beside him, the old general hunches down under the heavy load of stones, suffering in grim silence. Blood trickles down the boy's face as he trembles in fear, his wide blue eyes staring at the ground in complete disbelief of what just happened. The general slowly turns his head, his face cast in deep shadow as the kid weakly calls out to him, hoping for some kind of reassurance. But the old soldier snaps, raising his voice to command the boy to stop talking immediately before he says something they will both regret. He firmly tells the kid that there is absolutely no need to utter another single word about the incident. Meanwhile, a smug blonde noble in a white uniform stands with his arms crossed, sharing a sinister laugh with his companion about their upcoming plans. The arrogant noble sneers as he talks about the poor vagrants in the capital, comparing them to filthy parasites. His smug cruelty is classic high-born behavior. He truly believes they have no right to exist in his perfect city. He proudly declares his villainous plan to completely clear out every single one of those unfortunate people from the streets. A sudden shift in the wind causes a sharp eye to slowly crack open in the darkness. The dark brown eye opens fully, staring with sharp and quiet intensity as he watches everything unfold. Sensing the sudden shift in energy, The old general whips his head around with a look of pure astonishment on his face. Standing deep in the quiet forest, the veteran commander looks up in awe at a colossal, glowing golden warrior spirit that manifests in the sky. The radiant entity shines like a miniature sun, bathing the entire canopy in a brilliant light, and signaling that a legendary power has finally awakened. The sky glows in a brilliant shade of orange and gold, as a flock of birds flies across the sunset. Suddenly, a massive beam of light crashes straight down into the heart of the thick forest below. Deep within the woods, the dense bushes rustle violently as someone moves through the foliage. Our protagonist Ran peeks his head out of the leaves, scanning the area cautiously to make sure the coast is clear. Standing on the edge of the hill, Ran looks down at the massive royal camp filled with white tents. He cannot help but think that his current situation makes him feel like an absolute villain for no good reason. Ran suddenly senses someone behind him and spins around in surprise, finding a familiar figure waiting in the shadows as the hunting competition wraps up. Just as Ran is caught off guard, he turns around to find none other than the first princess, Mental Aberrant. She greets him with a sweet smile that still manages to send shivers down his spine. Ran is completely frozen and starts sweating bullets at the sudden appearance of the princess in this place. He can barely believe his eyes and struggles to maintain his composure under her intense gaze. He immediately bows to show proper etiquette, desperately trying to hide how nervous he actually is in her presence. The princess watches him with a knowing grin, clearly amused by his stiff reaction as she prepares to deliver some heavy news. She tells him that she understands his position, but her cold tone suggests there is a much darker meaning behind her words. She questions why anyone would ever dare to lie to their own flesh and blood, hinting at a deep betrayal. Her eyes glow with terrifying light as the atmosphere turns incredibly suffocating, showing the true ruthlessness of the royal family. Ran breaks out into a cold sweat, realizing that one wrong word here could cost him his life. He struggles to find the right response while keeping his emotions completely hidden. The princess casually explains how she noticed an unfamiliar color and decided to question her personal servant about it. Ran can only listen in stunned silence as she casually admits to ordering her own black horse to be killed. Talk about an extreme boss. She firmly believes that any creature failing to obey royalty simply deserves to die. Hearing her terrifying warning, Ran immediately drops to his knee, showing absolute submission to her overwhelming authority. He stares at the ground with a tense, serious expression, fully aware of the dangerous game he is playing with this royal family. Princess Mental turns and walks away with a gentle smile, mentioning how glad she is that he managed to return safely on his own. Ran stands up, watching her departure with a heavy heart. Ran realizes that dealing with Princess Mental is going to be incredibly difficult. She's a complete mystery, and trying to read her true intentions is absolutely impossible. As she walks off, she glances back with a terrifying red glow in her eyes, leaving a lasting impression of pure dread. Outside a massive military tent, the clouds drift lazily across the sky while voices echo from within. An elderly butler in a brown suit nervously waves his hands, looking completely distressed as he tries to explain a critical situation. Inside the tent, the butler explains that this happens during every royal hunting competition. Meanwhile, a young scholar with a bandaged head sits quietly while a highly decorated military general listens with crossed arms. The room falls into a heavy silence as everyone waits for the commanding officer to make his final decision. The old general turns his gaze toward the butler, sternly asking exactly how much time the injured young man will need to fully recover. Suddenly, a massive, heavily scarred hand claps down onto the shoulder of the young assistant, startling him completely. The old general smiles down at the young assistant, radiating an intense and pressuring aura that leaves no room for hesitation. Feeling the immense pressure, the bandaged assistant instantly puts on a bright, eager smile, practically glowing as he tries to match the fiery spirit of the general. The assistant jokingly complains that he has not been given a single day off until now, pointing out his tireless dedication. The old general grins with immense pride, claiming he will win the entire competition to fulfill the dream of his young assistant. As night falls, a single candle burns quietly on a wooden desk, while loud snoring echoes through the dark tent. The bandaged assistant is completely knocked out on his bed, snoring loudly with his mouth wide open and arms spread wide. While the young scholar sleeps peacefully, A mysterious hand slowly slips a sealed royal scroll right next to his head. Our boy wears a confident smirk, completely unfazed by whatever chaos is unfolding around him. He knows exactly what card he is holding, and he is ready to play it. An imperial decree is finally set in motion, carrying the weight of the highest authority in the land. This is the moment where the gears of fate start turning for everyone involved. Meanwhile, the old veteran sighs and decides that he desperately needs some fresh air to clear his heavy thoughts. The weight of his duties is clearly taking a toll on him, but as he turns around, his eyes widen in complete shock as he spots something sitting right there in the corner. His breath hitches as his mind races to make sense of it. The old veteran stares down at the heavy training pack loaded with large stones in absolute dread. This bag serves as a brutal reminder of the grueling physical toll he must endure once again. The bag makes a heavy clinking sound, as if mockingly reminding him of a burden he has been carrying for a very long time. The memories start flooding back, and they are not pleasant. He remembers when his son was still a young child, eagerly listening to the old legends of the Empire. He spoke of an ancient era when the world was drowning in chaos, until a divine savior descended to restore order. A young boy with wide, curious eyes looks up and asks if he is talking about the legendary Sierra the Great. Even as a child, he was fascinated by the stories of the divine founder. They stand before a massive stone monument of the great savior holding a giant sword. This godlike figure possessed unimaginable, mysterious powers, single-handedly putting an end to the endless wars that had ravaged the land for generations and bringing all nations under one banner. Over 1,000 years ago, this legendary savior finally united the lands and founded the mighty Aberan Empire. The veteran reminds his young son that this is the very imperial bloodline they are sworn to protect and serve with their lives, no matter the cost. The old man takes a deep breath, thinking of his beloved son Flynn. He grips his gear, knowing that the choices he makes today will decide the future of his family. Standing on the edge of a grassy hill, he gazes out at the beautiful sunrise painting the valley in warm, golden light. It is a peaceful view, but his mind is completely restless. With the massive pack of heavy stones weighing him down, he continues his march under the twilight sky. Despite his aging body screaming in pain, the old veteran is determined to push through this agonizing training. Suddenly, a loud horn echoes across the valley, shattering the morning silence. The old veteran freezes, his sharp eyes narrowing as he realizes the gathering has already begun. High up on the grassy plains, the trumpet blast continues to echo through the hills. Something major is happening down at the ceremonial grounds, and everyone is rushing to see. A massive crowd of soldiers and citizens gathers around a pool of glowing blue energy as rumors spread like wildfire. They whisper about the terrifying beasts that kept roaring throughout the night, wondering what kind of madness has been unleashed upon the capital. Suddenly, a giant elemental beast of water and ice rises from the depths, roaring with immense power. The sheer pressure of its mana sends shockwaves rippling through the entire courtyard, but the beast is instantly shattered into pieces by a blinding magical light. Standing before the shocked crowd is the first prince of the Aberan Empire, holding a sphere of pure elemental power, having defeated the legendary creature in a single night to prove his absolute authority. The golden-haired prince stands tall with an incredibly arrogant expression, looking down on everyone like they are mere insects. He is a man who knows his power and is not afraid to abuse it. Walking forward with a smug smile, the prince approaches the massive, imposing figure of the king. The entire plaza holds its breath, waiting to see how the monarch will react to this display. The bearded king looks down with a solemn, exhausted expression. He knows his son is powerful, but he also knows the terrifying ruthlessness that hides behind that handsome, golden face. Down in the crowd, Flynn's father is breaking out in a cold sweat as the whispers grow louder around him. He can feel the underlying threat in the air, and it is suffocating. Other nobles and soldiers stand in tense silence, exchanging worried glances. They all know that one wrong move in front of the royal family could mean instant death. The prince drops to one knee before the king, surrounded by heavily armored royal guards. It looks like a display of respect, but everyone knows it is a power play. With a chilling smile, the prince explains that he wants to restore the ruined aesthetics of the temple. But behind those poetic words lies a much darker, bloodier meaning. The veteran's face completely pales as he listens to the prince's speech. The horrifying truth of what the prince actually intends to do starts sinking in, shaking him to his core. He is suddenly hit with a flash of dark memories, picturing a floor completely drenched in thick, fresh blood. The metallic smell of death practically fills his senses. He remembers standing amidst a mountain of lifeless bodies while flames roared in the background. It was an absolute massacre, a cleansing ordered by the highest authority. The words of the decree echo in his mind, demanding that those deemed unworthy be cleansed from the empire. It is a brutal execution disguised as a holy mission. Blood drops down the veteran's forehead as his eye trembles in absolute horror. He realized that they are not just going to restore a temple, they are going to slaughter everyone. In his mind, he hears a desperate cry calling out to a father amidst a sea of blood. The traumatic memory of his son's danger forces his body to react on instinct. Splatters of blood paint his vision as the terrifying memory of blades slicing through flesh flashes before him. He cannot let history repeat itself, not to his family. With no more time for talk, he tightly grips the hilt and slowly draws his sharp blade from its sheath. He is fully prepared to unleash absolute chaos and cut down anyone standing in his way. With a desperate roar, the veteran lunges forward, drawing his blade as the shocked crowd of soldiers and nobles scatters in pure panic around him. Blades clash and bodies blur as the veteran unleashes his fury, striking down anyone who stands in his way to save his son from this nightmare. The veteran duke grips his blade with absolute determination, ready to do whatever it takes to protect his son. He knows he cannot turn back from this choice. From high above, our protagonist observes the chaotic spectacle below with complete composure. This sudden turn of events fits perfectly into his calculations. Looking down at the chaos, our protagonist remains completely unfazed by the sudden violence unfolding below. He knows exactly how this drama is going to play out. With a quiet sigh, he turns his head away from the crowd. The real pieces of his plan are finally falling into place. Suddenly, the bandaged kid is thrown straight to the ground right at our boy's feet. The impact rattles him as the guards watch closely. Terrified and trembling, the poor kid looks up at our protagonist and nervously asks what brings him to this place. He can barely get the words out. Our boy looks down at him with an icy expression and calmly tells him to step aside. He has no time for distractions. The sheer pressure of that cold gaze makes the kid break out in a cold sweat. He is completely paralyzed by fear. Realizing he is in way over his head, the bandaged kid scrambles to his feet and runs away as fast as his legs can carry him. He pushes his way back into the crowded plaza, screaming apologies to the onlookers as he desperately tries to reach the front lines. The bandaged kid freezes in his tracks, staring ahead in utter horror at the grim scene unfolding right before his eyes. While the young boy stands frozen in fear, the veteran duke kneels silently with his sword discarded on the ground. The imperial guards watch his every move with weapons drawn, as the arrogant blonde prince steps forward to personally handle the situation. The blonde prince is shaking with pure fury, his eyes wide with disbelief at the duke's absolute insolence. He cannot believe someone would dare challenge his authority. Remaining on his knee, the duke reminds the assembly that his family has faithfully guarded the imperial line from the front lines for over 1,000 years. His fierce gaze shows that he regrets absolutely nothing, even if his loyalty is being questioned by those in power. The stoic emperor stares down at his old warrior, his face a mask of solemn silence as he weighs the gravity of this situation. The blonde prince starts sweating, his anger temporarily mixing with hesitation as he feels the weight of the veteran duke's declaration. But the decision has already been made, and the emperor prepares to deliver his final, unyielding judgment. Unleashing a massive surge of blue magical energy from his palm, the prince steps forward to take matters into his own hands. Mocking the veteran warrior, the prince says he has completely lost his mind. With a twisted grin, he declares that such blatant treason warrants nothing less than immediate execution right on the spot, as his blue magical flames flare up with deadly intent. Accepting his grim fate, the duke closes his eyes and calmly states he will gladly pay with his life for interrupting this sacred ceremony. The bandaged kid screams out in absolute despair, his voice echoing across the courtyard. He is completely powerless to stop the prince from executing the brave Duke right in front of everyone. Standing amidst the crowd, our boy watches the execution prepare to unfold with a subtle, knowing smirk, satisfied that everything is finally starting. Far away from the intense palace drama, a peaceful river flows quietly through a lush green valley. A mysterious hooded traveler kneels at the water's edge to fill his leather flask, completely isolated from the chaos brewing back at the capital. As he dips the canteen into the stream, the cool water begins to ripple and bubble in a very unusual pattern. Strange blue light begins to glow beneath the surface, radiating outwards and making the gentle currents surge with magical energy. Stunned by the sudden phenomenon, the traveler recoils and wonders aloud what on earth is happening to the river. Within seconds, the entire river erupts into a massive, breathtaking network of glowing blue veins, illuminating the valley like a starry night sky. Under the shadow of his hood, the traveler stares at the glowing water with wide, golden eyes. As the magical energy swirls around his canteen, he realizes that whatever just happened back at the capital has triggered a massive change across the entire land. From below, the mysterious hooded warrior looks up in surprise, his eyes locked onto the brilliant magical trail as it streaks rapidly across the blue sky. The charges laid against him were incredibly severe, specifically the crime of insulting the imperial family. Swirling blue magic surrounded the commander as he knelt on the ground, completely immobilized by the power of his captors. A silver-haired noble with glowing yellow eyes stepped forward, ruthlessly channeling his water magic to bind the helpless commander. Without any hesitation, the noble declared that he was carrying out a summary execution on the spot. Out of nowhere, this high-ranking magic user charges up a massive spell right in front of the captain. The sheer pressure of his magical aura has everyone completely frozen in shock. The onlookers in the crowd watched in absolute horror, gasping as they realized escape was impossible for their leader. The commander was completely submerged in a giant sphere of water, choking as his lungs filled up with no way to escape. He desperately thrashed around in his watery prison as the life slowly drained from his body. This was a truly brutal way to go for such proud military leader. A young boy with goggles on his head stared in utter desperation, tears welling in his eyes as he watched the tragedy unfold. As the water pressure crushed him, the commander slowly began to lose consciousness, accepting his grim fate. Amidst the chaos, our protagonist stood perfectly still in his military uniform, watching the execution with cold and calculating eyes. Our boy just stood there like a complete boss. Known to everyone as the Seventh Prince, he stared intently through the watery barrier, tracking every single detail of the magic. The drowning commander locked eyes with the young prince, struggling to comprehend what the boy was planning. Clinging to a tiny sliver of hope, the drowning commander refused to let go of his consciousness. He stared back at the cold crowd, screaming internally that he could not afford to die just yet. A deep purpose still drove him forward, and he refused to let his journey end here. The executioner raised his hand high, preparing to unleash the final crushing blow to end the commander once and for all. A blinding pillar of light and water shot straight up into the sky, creating a massive magical explosion that shook the entire valley. The raw power of the spell evaporated the surrounding moisture, leaving everyone in absolute awe of the executioner's colossal force. The shock wave rippled through the clear blue sky, leaving a trail of powerful magical residue behind. Churning water magic completely enveloped the entire execution site, sealing off any remaining chance of survival for the target. The intense water pressure pulverized the surrounding terrain, turning solid rock into a cloud of flying debris and dust. Satisfied with his destructive work, the executioner slowly lowered his hand as the magical aura began to fade. He stood there with complete confidence, knowing that his target had been thoroughly erased from existence with absolutely no chance of survival. The young goggled boy wept in despair, his heart completely shattered as his beloved commander vanished. Our protagonist maintained his cold expression, showing absolutely no emotion as the crowd panicked around him. Back in his quiet study, a young boy with gray hair diligently wrote down his thoughts in a leather journal. He paused and looked out the grand window, noticing a strange magical light streaking across the sky in the distance. Determined to catch up, the mysterious hooded warrior leaps from the high cliffs to chase the signal. He keeps his eyes locked onto the brilliant magical trail as it streaks rapidly across the sky. The cloaked warrior crashed down onto the grassy field, punching the ground to absorb the heavy impact of his landing. The sheer force of his arrival cracked the earth, sending dirt and leaves flying in every direction. Showing no signs of slowing down, the mysterious fighter sprinted at incredible speed across the open plain. His golden eyes glowed with intense focus, locked onto the massive magical signal ahead as he prepared himself for a clash. He dashed across the vast green fields, rapidly closing the distance between himself and the giant swirling sphere of water magic. Every single step carried immense power, propelling him forward like a stray arrow flying towards its destination. Running at full speed, he noted that the intense magical energy made it impossible to see what was happening inside. The churning water was a chaotic blur of blue energy, hiding the true state of anyone trapped deep within the magical prison. He knew he had to act fast before the magic completely crushed whatever remained inside. With a sudden leap, he launched himself high into the sky, leaving a brilliant golden trail behind him. He soared directly over the giant water dome, positioning himself for a decisive strike. Hurtling down rapidly from the sky, the hooded hero reached out with his bare hand, ready to pierce the swirling magical barrier. His determination did not waver for a second as the ground rushed up to meet him. He plunged his hand deep into the violent vortex of water, instantly disrupting the magical flow with his raw physical power. The immense pressure shattered under his touch, forcing the entire execution dome to violently rupture. He immediately flees the scene of the collapse, desperately sprinting through the wet terrain to avoid being captured by the Imperial forces. A mysterious hooded figure sprints through the wet forest, glancing back in absolute panic to see if anyone is following him. He finally halts at the very edge of a crumbling cliffside, staring out into the open horizon as loose dirt tumbles down into the abyss below. Panting heavily under his hood, the runner stares in disbelief as a massive beam of blue magical energy pierces straight into the clouds. He grinds his teeth and mutters under his breath, wondering if he completely lost track of his target. Standing tall on the edge of the precipice, the hooded man watches the distant explosion light up the entire forest canopy. The sheer power of the blast ripples through the air, confirming that the battle is already over. Back at the execution site, the bandaged boy stands completely paralyzed with shock as the dust finally begins to settle. He stares blankly at the empty space, muttering the title of his fallen master, the Duke. He stands completely alone against the blinding glare of the ruined execution arena, swallowed by the realization that everything has changed. With the Duke's weapon left abandoned in the dirt, the gossiping crowd mutters about the grim future of his household, wondering who will seize control of the kingdom now. Accepting the harsh reality of the Duke's demise, the high noble closes his eyes in silent resignation, while his anxious subordinate looks on in absolute dread of what comes next. A heavy silence falls over the vast execution grounds as the stunned spectators stare at the massive pillar of stone, realizing a legendary warrior has just met his tragic end. Meanwhile, the arrogant victor scoffs and casually dusts off his hands, treating the entire life or death battle like nothing more than a tedious chore. With a confident stride, he turns his back on the ruins and walks away, completely ignoring the terrified onlookers who lowers their heads in silent submission. The crowd wastes no time gossiping, murmuring that the fetus family is officially ruined and calling the late Duke an absolute idiot. Walking past them, our bandaged boy hangs his head, forced to endure their cruel words. Footsteps echo heavily across the dirt, as nobles and commoners alike begin to disperse from the ruined arena. Heavy boots shuffle through the dust, drawing closer to our quiet protagonist as he slowly makes his way out. Suddenly, a passerby intentionally swings his foot forward, delivering a parry, mocking kick right at the heels of our boy. People surround our boy, whispering and pointing as he walks through the hostile crowd with his bandaged head lowered. They mock him relentlessly, enjoying the sudden downfall of the trusted aide of the Duke. To make matters worse, someone disgustingly spits right at him while the rest of the crowd erupts into cruel laughter, thoroughly enjoying every second of his utter humiliation. Amused by the pathetic display, the scheming, dark-haired noble watches from the safety of the crowd, knowing his faction is the one truly winning this dangerous game. Seeking refuge from the cruel jeers, Our boy slips quietly into a deserted military tent pitched at the edge of the camp. Safely out of sight, Tolan desperately tears through the wreckage of the broken camp bed, frantic to retrieve a hidden secret before anyone else finds it. Brushing aside the dirty blankets, he finally uncovers a tightly rolled parchment scroll secured with a dark wax seal. His hands tremble as he lifts the document, knowing this scroll holds the final, secret instructions left behind by his late master. Breaking the seal, he unrolls the parchment to reveal a hidden letter written in the hand of the Duke, warning of a grave family secret. The written words bring back the heavy memory of Duke Agony, who desperately held this very scroll while fearing for the grim fate of his son, Flynn. He pleads from beyond the grave, begging Tolan to grant a dying old man's final wish before time completely runs out. The late Duke's eyes are filled with profound sorrow, the face of a desperate father who knew his time was short and had no choice but to leave this heavy burden behind. But as Tolan reads further, the message takes a dark turn, shockingly shifting the blame directly onto him and declaring that everything is entirely his fault. This devastating revelation strikes Tolan like a physical blow, leaving him completely paralyzed with horror as his mind struggles to process such a cruel twist. Overwhelmed by shock, his fingers lose their grip entirely, letting the scroll slip away and flutter helplessly down to the dirt floor. Tolan collapses from the unbearable emotional shock, falling completely unconscious. Right beside his limp body, the scroll reveals the Duke's final decree, appointing his loyal aide as the sole successor to the entire fetus legacy. Talk about a heavy burden. Meanwhile, far away in a grand white tower, violent and agonizing coughing echoes from the high windows, signaling that someone's health is rapidly failing. Inside the tower, Flynn is doubled over in agony, coughing up thick pools of blood into his hands. Leaning casually against the wall, his scheming advisor smugly points out that his condition has severely worsened ever since the royal hunting competition. Desperate and terrified, Flynn summons his ice magic, frantically demanding to know if there is something fundamentally wrong with the treatment he's being given. But the advisor merely smiles with mock sympathy, smoothly warning him that releasing his magical energy so hastily will only end up making his condition far worse. With blood dripping from his mouth, Flynn glares at his supposed ally, his glowing golden eye wide with the bone-chilling realization that he's being slowly poisoned from the inside out. This smug advisor thinks he has everything completely figured out. He is practically gloating, imagining the exact thoughts of his helpless victim. To rub salt in the wound, the advisor casually mentions that Tolan is still in a coma, mockingly claiming he feels guilty for the loyal aide's tragic state. But speak of the devil, because those eyes just snapped wide open. It looks like our boy is finally waking up from his forced slumber. Staring blankly at the ceiling, Tolan lies completely still in his bed, his mind racing as he tries to process his sudden return to reality. He slowly sits up, but his body is still incredibly weak. A panicked servant rushes to his side, warning him to take it easy and not push himself so soon. Before Tolan can even get his bearings, the servant drops some shocking news. He has been completely out cold for over 2 whole weeks. Putting on his glasses to clear his blurry vision, Tolan is immediately urged by the servant to go see the young Duke before doing anything else. As they make their way down the grand corridor, Tolan can barely hold himself upright. The servant quickly fills him in on the absolute disaster that occurred while he was asleep, explaining that all their business partners have abandoned them, with their finances in a dire state and the mansion falling into neglect. Asking the royal family for help is totally out of the question after that recent disaster. Despite his staggering steps, Tolan pushes forward through the dim hallway. The servant is still rambling about their doom when they suddenly spot a small figure waiting ahead. There he is, the young Duke himself, silently watching them approach with a heavy, unreadable expression on his face. Seeing the young boy brings a sudden rush of shock to Tolan. He gasps, his eyes widening behind his spectacles as the gravity of the family collapse truly hits him. Dragging his exhausted body down, our boy immediately drops to one knee to show his loyalty. He assures the young master that he is completely fine, dismissing his own weakness. The little Duke looks down at him, clearly worried about his loyal advisor's condition. But Tolan keeps his gaze lowered, focusing entirely on the young master's safety. Our bandaged boy can barely believe his ears as shocking gossip drifts inside. He quickly moves toward the window, stunned by the wild rumors the estate staff are actually spreading. While Tolan watches quietly from the window, the estate garden has become a hotbed for nasty gossip. Two snide servants are whispering, laughing about the rumor that the young duke is nothing but a useless vagrant who has lost everything. Tolan listens to their insults with a cold, hardened expression. He realizes right then and there that the mansion is absolutely crawling with disloyal opportunists. He knows that once a family's reputation is dragged through the mud like this, erasing the stain of treason becomes almost impossible. Back inside, the brown-haired servant lowers his head in shame, feeling completely powerless. The harsh reality of their ruined status is crushing the spirits of the few loyal allies left. Suddenly, the servant flinches in sheer surprise as Tolan says something completely unexpected. He looks up, his eyes wide with disbelief at what our boy is suggesting. With his glasses completely clouded with a cold glare, Tolan asks if he really needs to repeat himself. The gentle advisor is gone, replaced by someone utterly chilling. The servant immediately folds under the terrifying pressure and bows even deeper. He quickly apologizes, realizing he messed up big time by questioning Tolan's orders. As the terrified servant scrambles to leave the room, Tolan calmly announces his next move. They are going to throw a funeral. Turning his gaze back to the small boy, Tolan speaks softly, asking the young duke to understand why this extreme measure is absolutely necessary. The young duke looks up at his protector, completely bewildered by the sudden talk of a funeral. Meanwhile, Tolan slowly raises a hand to slide his glasses off his face, revealing the sharp glare hidden underneath. With his wide, innocent eyes, the young master tries to make sense of the heavy atmosphere. He has no idea what kind of scheme his advisor is cooking up. Holding his spectacles aside, Tolan's face remains cast in deep shadow. The time for playing nice and hiding in the shadows is officially over. He glares forward with a terrifying intensity, declaring that this fake funeral is the only way to flush out their enemies. It is time to show these traitors what happens when they cross the fetus family. Inside a grand imperial chamber, everything sits in perfect, undisturbed silence. But this quiet room is about to become an absolute war zone in a matter of seconds. Without warning, a massive explosion of pure rage tears through the room, shattering furniture into a million wooden splinters as a furious voice screams out in absolute anger. The devastating tantrum continues as priceless decor gets pulverized, sending thick clouds of dust and debris flying everywhere, while the chaotic noise echoes down the mansion hallways. This guy completely loses his mind, laughing like a maniac while standing by the window of his wrecked room. With debris scattered all over the floor, his terrifying laughter echoes throughout the mansion. Outside the massive double doors, a terrified maid winces and covers her ears, praying she doesn't get caught in the middle of the royal's terrifying wrath. The prince clenches his fist so hard his veins look ready to pop, his eyes glowing with murderous intent. He grinds his teeth and mutters a dark promise to tear his enemy apart limb from limb. Whoever pushed him this far is going to face a very painful end. He starts talking about a ridiculous plan to enter the imperial forest, trying to understand why he is being forced into such a bizarre situation. The prince whirls around and screams, demanding to know why he should ever agree to do something so incredibly ridiculous. Meanwhile, our boy just stands there looking completely unbothered, calmly fixing his hair as if he is not currently being threatened by a murderous royal. Our boy casually tells him to just go in, explaining that he has some private business inside the forest and needs to keep his whereabouts completely secret from the public. He points out that if the first prince himself enters the forest, nobody else will dare to go inside and disturb them. The prince glares at him, deeply suspicious, and demands to know what kind of secret scheme our boy is planning to pull off inside that dangerous place. Our boy simply responds that he should just look at this whole dangerous excursion as a necessary treatment. With a smug smile, our boy tells the prince that he can just quietly wait in this room, but the royal is already moving in to strike. Before our boy can even finish his sentence, the prince lunges forward with blinding speed, slamming his hand directly around our boy's neck in a brutal chokehold. Pinning our boy to the cold floor, the prince unleashes a surge of crackling blue magic, mockingly pointing out that our boy has grown far too arrogant lately. He sneers, bragging that he could easily find elite imperial scholars to handle a simple treatment instead of relying on a nobody. He lifts our protagonist high off the ground by his throat, laughing like an absolute psychopath while blue sparks of lethal mana surge all around them. Our boy struggles to breathe under the crushing grip, but his eyes remain incredibly dark and focused as he prepares to turn the tables. Enraged beyond belief, the blonde-haired man delivers a chilling threat to end our protagonist's life right then and there. He is absolutely done playing games and wants to finish this fight once and for all. But our boy is already one step ahead, channeling his own subtle spark of energy with a quiet tap of his fingers. He reminds the arrogant prince that using destructive magical energy right now has a very steep cost. Suddenly, the prince's eyes widen in pure shock as dark blood begins pouring from his nose and mouth, his face turning pale. The prince gasps in agony as a heavy stream of black blood splatters violently across the floor. The arrogant royal staggers backward, completely clutching his chest, while our boy calmly stands up and brushes the dust off his clothes. He coolly explains that if the prince stops the treatment at this exact moment, his body will be completely paralyzed for at least a week. Wiping a bit of blood from his own lip, our boy flashes a terrifyingly evil grin and asks if the prince wants the entire imperial court to find out he collapsed. The prince falls straight to his knees, clutching his bloody face as our boy stands over him like an absolute ruler, pointing out that if this treatment fails, another royal will gladly steal the throne. He looks down at the defeated royal, coldly asking if he still fails to understand the reality of his situation. He warns the prince that he needs to start using his brain if he actually wants to stay alive. Our boy aggressively grabs the prince's bloody chin, forcing those glowing, terrified yellow eyes to look up and realize who actually holds all the power. He whispers chilling warning, letting the prince know that his patience is running incredibly thin. He demands that the prince immediately drop any foolish ideas of sending secret spies to monitor his movements. Stepping away from the kneeling prince, our boy casually mentions that making a troublesome royal disappear without a trace is always a viable backup plan. Walking toward the exit, our boy leaves the defeated royal completely broken on the floor, knowing he now has absolute leverage. Pushing the massive doors open, our boy adds that resisting further will only delay the cure and exhaust them both. Fuming with uncontrollable rage, the blonde-haired man demands to know what our protagonist is actually trying to achieve here. He breathes heavily, absolutely desperate for answers as his temper flares. Pausing right at the threshold, our boy slowly repeats the question, letting the silence stretch out between them. He looks back over his shoulder with an expression of cold indifference, leaving the terrified prince completely in the dark. He slowly continues his dramatic answer, wondering how he should actually put his grand design into words as his focus shifts to the dangerous forest ahead. Meanwhile, his familiar wings its way toward the designated meeting spot inside the imperial forest, carrying the crucial items needed for the next phase of his plan. The loyal messenger dives deep into the thick canopy, determined to deliver the package directly to its master before anyone else can discover their secret hideout. As the bird finally reaches its destination, the final preparations are set in motion for the treatment that will change the fate of the entire empire. Stepping onto the forest floor, our boy finally delivers the chilling punchline to his answer, declaring that his ultimate goal is nothing but peace. Our boy stands in the middle of the dense woods, looking around carefully. He cleared out this entire area on purpose, even though it meant annoying the first prince. After his recent experiences, he realizes a strong chance exists that he can copy other creatures. He thinks about how his unique transformation abilities might expand further. Peeking from behind a massive tree trunk, our protagonist keeps his eyes peeled for any local wildlife. He needs to test his theory before someone interrupts his work. Reaching slowly into his brown shoulder bag, he prepares the bait. Everything has to go perfectly if he wants to catch a new target today. He considers the rules of his power and realizes that physical contact is likely the key trigger. He must touch the animal directly to copy its form. His mind flashes back to a previous encounter where a stern knight on horseback rode past him with soldiers marching behind. That memory confirms his physical touch theory. Every single animal he managed to copy so far required some level of physical contact. He knows he cannot just look at them to copy them. He carefully sets up a simple wooden trap on a fallen log using a stick and some thin string. This classic method should do the trick nicely. Standing over his handiwork, our boy tells himself that it is time to start. He places the trap and prepares to lure his target. He backs away while thinking about the top-quality berries he swiped from the imperial kitchen. Nearby, a small squirrel watches him from behind the mossy tree root. Our boy stops and turns his head when he hears tiny rustling noise nearby. His sharp eyes focus on the sound instantly. Up on a thick tree trunk, a cute little squirrel squeaks loudly at him. Our protagonist watches the little creature with a calm expression. The small rodent looks absolutely adorable with its wide black eyes and perfectly striped back. It seems very curious about the human visitor. It scrambles down the rough bark, heading straight toward our boy. Its quick movements show no fear of the giant standing in front of it. Offering some delicious nuts in his open palm, our boy welcomes the little guy warmly. The squirrel reaches out its tiny paws to grab the food. The greedy little animal climbs right onto his hand and starts happily munching on the treats. Our protagonist smiles as physical contact is successfully made. With the necessary contact established, our boy focuses his mind to see if his power will trigger. He concentrates hard on the small squirrel in his hand. He waits patiently for the familiar energy to flow through his body. His heartbeat quickens as he anticipates the transformation process. He drops down to his knees as a magic circle begins to form deep inside him. The connection feels much stronger than before. Suddenly, a bright golden aura erupts around our boy, illuminating the entire forest floor. Startled by the sudden flash, the little squirrel leaps away in terror. As the glowing light fades, our boy looks down at his hands with a confused expression. Nothing seems to have changed with his body. Placing a hand on his chin, he ponders what went wrong. He wonders if the power did not work or if he missed something crucial. He questions whether his deep desires actually matter for the change. He wonders if wanting to climb a tree or enter a small hole triggers the form. Before he can figure it out, the squirrel suddenly snatches his brown shoulder bag and bolts away at lightning speed. Our boy stands frozen in absolute shock as his belongings go flying through the air. The little thief squeaks happily while dragging the bag behind it. Finding his voice, our boy screams at the squirrel, demanding to know why it is stealing his entire bag. This was definitely not part of his plan. He drops onto all fours and chases after the tiny criminal with everything he has got. He yells out that the squirrel should just ask if it wants acorns instead of stealing. But the little thief is incredibly fast and keeps sprinting ahead. Lunging forward with a desperate reach, his fingers barely manage to grab hold of the trailing strap of his bag. He grips it with all his strength. The determined squirrel scaling a massive tree trunk drags the bag up with it. Our boy refuses to let go and ends up dangling in the air as he pulls down on the strap. Talk about an embarrassing way to fight for your gear. Gritting his teeth in frustration, our boy stares up at the stubborn thief. He cannot believe a simple forest animal is giving him this much trouble. Holding the leather strap tightly, our boy mutters to himself, wondering how long a tiny creature like this can possibly hold out against him. Just as our boy tries to hold on for dear life, the worn-out leather strap suddenly snaps. He can only stare in absolute shock as his prize slips away. All that effort goes down the drain in a single second, leaving him completely empty-handed and utterly exhausted. Lightning cracks across the sky as a heavy downpour begins to drench the deep forest. The thunderous roar echoes through the trees, making a bad situation even worse. The storm rages on with relentless fury as the rain pours down in sheets. Nature itself seems to be mocking his terrible luck today. Later that evening, the clouds part over the quiet palace gardens under a double moon. The grand spires stand tall and silent under the eerie night sky. Deep inside the palace, a set of heavy wooden doors blocks the entrance to the royal quarters. Everything is perfectly still until a soft set of footsteps approaches. A young maid carefully pushes the heavy door open while carrying a tray of warm food. She hopes her prince is finally back and ready to get some rest. The poor girl nearly drops her tray in pure shock when she notices the prince standing there. His clothes are completely covered in dirt and mud as if he just fought a war. Our boy can only sigh while clutching the remains of his ruined leather bag. He spent the entire day dealing with the most stubborn creature in existence. He calmly tells her that he understands while she quickly sets the dinner tray down on the table. She still looks incredibly worried about his state. Looking down at his ruined bag, covered in leaves, our protagonist silently curses his terrible luck. He literally spent his entire day chasing a single squirrel through the muddy woods. It was easily one of the most frustrating experiences of his life. The maid glances over at him with a nervous sweat bead rolling down her face. She has never seen the prince look this completely disheveled before. He brushes off his dusty outfit and mentions that he needs to take a hot bath before eating anything. The maid can only nod in agreement. He begins to walk away feeling the absolute weight of exhaustion in his bones. All he wants is some clean clothes and a moment of peace. But just as he takes a step, his torn leather bag suddenly begins to squirm. Both of them freeze as a tiny striped head pops out of the hole. He whips his head around in absolute disbelief as he realizes the little thief actually hitched a ride inside his bag the entire time. He lunges forward in a desperate attempt to grab the sneaky rodent, but the agile creature quickly leaps out and darts across the floor. A dark and chaotic grin spreads across the face of our protagonist as he grips the torn strap. He is officially done playing nice with this forest menace. The squirrel leaps directly onto the terrified maid, causing her to shriek in pure panic. It turns the entire royal bedroom into a chaotic zoo. After a wild chase, the maid stands there completely dazed with question marks virtually floating around her head. She cannot process what just happened. Panting heavily with a wild look in his eyes, our boy commands her to fetch something right now, because he is completely determined to win this war. He demands that she bring him a fresh change of clothes as quickly as possible. He cannot stand staying in these muddy garments for another second. The maid sprints down the long castle hallway as fast as her legs can carry her. She wants to get those clothes before things get even crazier. Clutching the clean royal garments to her chest, the poor girl breathes heavily while rushing back. She is terrified of keeping the prince waiting. She rounds a corner at full speed, calling out to tell him to wait just a little bit longer. But her heart instantly drops to her stomach when she realizes she is about to crash directly into a very powerful figure standing in the middle of the corridor. The terrified maid suddenly finds herself cornered, dropping to her knees in absolute fear. Standing right in front of her is the intimidating blonde woman, looking down like a merciless ruler. The blonde woman stares down with cold and piercing yellow eyes. She calmly demands to know where the maid is going in such a ridiculous hurry. The maid immediately throws herself flat on the floor in a deep bend, dropping the clean clothes. She is shaking violently from head to toe. Tears stream down the face of the maid as she trembles in pure terror, begging for mercy. She knows even the slightest mistake here could cost her everything. The elegant blonde woman slowly reaches her pale hand down toward the trembling maid. The silence in the long hallway becomes absolutely suffocating. The poor girl trembles in absolute horror as she waits for the looming punishment, her entire body completely paralyzed by fear. But instead of a strike, a strange blue magical light begins to gather around her hand. She hovers her palm right over the head of the kneeling maid. With a gentle tap, she activates her mind magic, diving straight into the servant's private memories to see exactly what she has been hiding. Her eyes glow with an eerie blue light as she ruthlessly sifts through the maid's memories to find out what happened today. As she digs deeper, she is shocked to find a memory of her brother looking completely disheveled and covered in dirt. This suspicious sight instantly catches her attention, making her realize that her brother was definitely up to some secret scheme. She notes that her brother was clearly not relaxing in the garden like everyone claimed, which means he is hiding a massive secret. Armed with this new information, she is definitely going to investigate his mysterious behavior very closely. Night falls over the grand imperial palace, its massive blue domes glowing under the starry sky. Behind these elegant walls, a bizarre struggle is about to unfold in the quiet corridors. Our boy stands in the dimly lit hallway, staring down at something small moving on the polished floor. Sweating slightly, he tries to maintain his composure, keeping his eyes locked onto his tiny target. He spreads his arms wide, gently urging the stray squirrel to just give up and let itself be caught quietly. But this squirrel is not going down without a fight, standing on its hind legs and squeaking defiantly at him. It puffs out its chest, ready to defend its freedom at all costs. Looking at the tiny creature, Our prince narrows his eyes as a wave of irritation washes over him. The annoying sound of scratching claws instantly triggers a buried memory from his past life. He remembers lying awake in a trashy semi-basement apartment, tortured by the sound of rats scratching inside the walls. Rent prices really are the ultimate villain of any life. He refuses to tolerate that noise ever again. With lightning speed, our boy lunges forward, extending his hand to snatch the elusive rodent right off the floor. Success, he squeezes the chubby little squirrel in his grip, sighing in relief now that he finally caught it. That relief instantly vanishes as the angry squirrel clamps its sharp teeth deep into his thumb, drawing royal blood. The sudden pain catches him completely off guard. He shrieks in agony, wondering how such a tiny creature dares to bite the hand of royalty. Taking advantage of his shock, the squirrel slips from his grasp and bolts across the floor. Scrambling up the wallpaper, the little rodent climbs with impressive speed, leaving our boy empty-handed. It perches high up on the wall, molding near the ceiling, looking down at the prince from safety. Clutching his bleeding hand, our boy curses his luck, completely unaware of the strange energy beginning to pool in his palm. He closes his eyes, trying to suppress the weird, tingling sensation spreading rapidly from the bite wound throughout his entire body. A sudden burst of golden light sparks from his hand, illuminating the dark hallway with a magical glow. Our prince snaps his eyes open in absolute shock as the overwhelming power completely takes over his senses. His mind races as the magical surge intensifies, making him realize something bizarre is happening to his body. Up on the wall, the squirrel watches in fascination as a dark silhouette of golden energy completely envelops the prince. The golden aura flares brightly, filling the entire corridor with blinding magic. Sweating from the sheer intensity, the squirrel clings tight to the wall as the magical feedback washes over it. As the magic envelopes him, our boy suddenly realizes exactly what triggered this bizarre reaction. He finally understands the secret condition required to transform his body into a specific animal. A mischievous smirk creeps onto the rodent's face as it prepares to execute its next move. The squirrel dives off the ceiling molding, plunging straight down into the swirling vortex of magical light below. Falling from such a height would be dangerous for any normal creature, but this is no ordinary rodent. It lands right as the blinding light explodes in a final, quiet puff of golden smoke. Suddenly, the heavy doors of the corridor fly open as a blonde noblewoman and her maid rush into the room. She expected to catch the prince red-handed, but her angry expression instantly freezes as she stares down the corridor. Instead of finding the prince she came to confront, she is greeted by a bizarre little silhouette waiting in her path. She strains her eyes, trying to make sense of the strange, tiny creature blocking the middle of the hallway. Instead of the prince, she finds the brown squirrel struggling to carry a second, completely unconscious white squirrel on its back. Horrified by this sight, she covers her mouth, assuming the imperial family must have done something terrible to the poor child. The maid gasps in absolute shock, holding her hands over her face at the tragic scene before them. Meanwhile, the brown squirrel sweats bullets, dragging the unconscious prince squirrel away to make their ultimate escape. By the next morning, the chaotic events of the night before have finally settled down inside the peaceful palace. Back inside, our boy gently stroked the little squirrel, who happily leaned into his warm hand. He noted that the little guy had not left his side since last night. The squirrel was completely glued to him. The cute squirrel nibbled away on a delicious acorn, thoroughly enjoying its tiny feast on the table. Our protagonist happily realized he had finally figured out the secret of transforming into various animals. First came the mysterious black raven, soaring through the dark skies with glowing red eyes after his very first attempt. After that, he managed to turn into both the powerful black horse and this tiny squirrel. But a strange catch existed, as all these beasts shared one single thing in common before his transformation. He remembered holding the dark bird in his room, riding the massive stallion, and finally carrying the frightened squirrel. Every single one of them had been physically touched by him before he copied their forms. This contact was the key to unlocking their shapes. Thinking back on how these events played out made him break out in a cold sweat. He never expected the blonde noblewoman to possess such a terrifyingly cold expression in real life. It was far worse than any description written in the original book. Just looking at her vacant eyes was enough to make him freeze on the spot. While the noblewoman and the maid stood talking near the entrance, the little squirrel seized the perfect opportunity. It quietly sneaked past them and jumped out the open window to make its ultimate escape back to safety. The plan worked flawlessly without anyone noticing. Once he was safely away, he returned to his human form and quietly stepped back into the room. For a moment, our protagonist genuinely believed his entire plan was about to end right then and there. Luckily, he managed to keep his cool, playing along to keep up appearances and avoid any unwanted suspicion. The ominous thought of what would happen tomorrow hung heavily in his mind as he waited. He gritted his teeth, knowing the noblewoman wanted him to come find her for their next meeting. She had made it clear they had some highly important matters to discuss behind closed doors. That spine-chilling warning left our protagonist with absolutely no choice but to comply. He knew this dangerous woman held all the power, and making a single mistake tomorrow would seal his doom before he could even start. Sitting back with his arms crossed, he wondered if she had somehow figured out his secrets. As the squirrel distracted itself with food, he kept racking his brain over what she actually wanted. A chilling thought crossed his mind as he wondered if she had discovered his true identity. He suddenly stood up and threw his hands in the air, seeking some validation from his furry friend. Talk about dramatic. The next morning, he finally arrived at the Grand Palace to face his highly anticipated meeting. A loyal knight in silver armor bowed deeply, showing his absolute respect as our boy approached. The heavy silence of the palace hallway only added to his growing anxiety as he prepared to enter. Even though the novel described this place as grand, seeing these massive doors in person was breathtaking. Inside, the mastermind was already waiting for him, maintaining her perfect aristocratic poise to keep him on edge. He carefully approached her, keeping a respectful distance to avoid showing any signs of weakness. This tense face-to-face meeting would determine whether he could successfully navigate her dangerous game or expose his secret identity right then and there. She offered a warm, gentle smile, which was a massive contrast to her usual terrifying aura. Our boy immediately apologized for keeping her waiting, trying his best to stay on her good side. She giggled softly at his incredibly polite manner, telling him he had always been this way. She looked at him thoughtfully, silently contemplating his sudden change in behavior with a faint smirk. He politely lowered his head slightly, keeping his true thoughts completely hidden from her incredibly sharp eyes. He remembered the ancient lore, stating that their bloodline power always manifested as magic related to nature. The imperial family holds absolute power through their unique elemental abilities, where the emperor commands destructive fire magic while the first prince rules over water. But one legendary power stands completely above all others in this entire kingdom. She decided to test his magical compatibility herself, channeling her raw power directly into him to see if he possessed the legendary gift. She watched him closely, fully expecting him to fail this test just like everyone else before him. The sheer intensity of her pressure was overwhelming, making it clear she held absolute authority over him. Under this immense spiritual weight, he felt completely trapped, realizing how easily she could crush him if she wanted. However, a massive obstacle remains because unlocking this legendary bloodline power requires him to meet an incredibly difficult and highly specific second condition. She was absolutely certain that this final restriction would keep him powerless, preventing him from ever unlocking his true family legacy. But her confidence was about to be shattered as she realized the magic was actually reacting to him against all odds. Meanwhile, deep within Forgotten Cavern, the stage was being set for a highly dangerous encounter. Heavy water droplets slowly splash against the stone floor, echoing loudly in the absolute silence of the cave. A pained gasp escapes his lips as the suffocating tension in the dark cave grows more unbearable by the second. A battle-worn knight commander sits in the shadows, his face covered in dirt and sweat as he desperately tries to catch his breath. His heavy armor clinks softly, reflecting the grim reality of his defeat in this damp dungeon. Grimacing in intense pain, the old soldier grits his teeth as the pressure in the room starts to feel completely suffocating. He clutches his head in absolute agony, trembling violently on the cold ground as a terrifying presence looms over him. Sitting quietly nearby, a mysterious cloaked figure rests his hand on a massive sword, watching the old man suffering without a single trace of pity. The knight commander suddenly recoils in absolute shock, scrambling backward on the dirt as he realizes he is no longer alone. Looking up with sheer terror written across his face, The old commander watches the cloaked warrior slowly rise and approach him. With a cold and deliberate motion, the silent intruder grips his hilt and slowly draws the gleaming blade, ready to put an end to this pathetic struggle. A sharp metallic ring echoes through the cavern, signaling that this negotiation is officially over. Our protagonist steps into the light, his hood partially casting a shadow over his face as he coldly points his weapon forward. The terrifying aura radiating from our boy leaves the veteran knight completely frozen on the ground, staring helplessly up at the sharp edge of the blade. Our boy demands a simple yes or no answer, explaining that the old man's next words will decide his ultimate fate. His eyes glow with chilling golden light, revealing a unique pattern that shows he is not playing any games here. With the cold steel pressed directly against the trembling knight commander's forehead, our protagonist waits silently for the final answer that determines if he resides or dies. Our protagonist is completely helpless as a mysterious magic user places her hand directly on his head. She unleashes a sudden surge of electric mental magic, testing his composure to the absolute limit. He can barely keep his composure under this overwhelming pressure. She is testing him, and one wrong word could end his new life before it even starts. This blonde noblewoman looks down on him with a chilling smirk, her eyes glowing with absolute authority. She clearly holds all the cards in this twisted game. Sitting frozen on the sofa, our boy realizes the terrifying truth of his situation. He just possessed the body of the seventh prince, and he is already facing a lethal interrogation. The intense magical pressure continues to surge through his mind as she tries to force answers out of him. He has to play it incredibly cool, or his secret will be exposed right then and there. She notices his silence and mockingly asks if he is finding it too hard to answer. Her polite tone only makes the underlying threat so much worse. He frantically weighs his options while the magical pressure intensifies. Should he play dumb and pretend to know what she is talking about, or take a different gamble? Every second feels like an eternity as he tries to keep his breathing steady. If he makes even a tiny mistake, she will see right through him. Fortunately, she pulls her hand back, giving him a temporary moment to breathe. He realizes his only hope is to act exactly how the original seventh prince would respond. The heavy sound of her heels clicking echoes through the luxurious room as she walks away. Our boy remains seated, watching her every move like a hawk. Suddenly, she begins to clap slowly with a mocking expression on her face. The rhythmic sound fills the silent room, adding to the heavy suspense. She turns around, gesturing toward the massive double doors. She casually remarks that she finds it rather vexing how her dear little brother refuses to speak. Hearing those words, the two heavily armored knights standing guard by the door completely freeze. They look absolutely terrified to hear his royal identity mentioned. Our boy glances over at the nervous guards, noticing their sudden panic, as royal politics here are toxic as hell. The noblewoman acts distressed, as if dealing with a difficult child, while one of the guards instantly drops to his knees in submission. She drops a dark warning about how she absolutely loathes noise more than anything else in the world. The room instantly falls dead silent. Her eyes flare up with an eerie magical light, as she prepares to take drastic measures to keep things quiet. In an instant, her powerful mental magic takes hold of the guards. Their eyes glow blankly as they are stripped of their free will. The armored guards are completely immobilized under her powerful mental magic, kneeling helplessly in the shadows. They are unable to move a single muscle as the tension in the room reaches a boiling point. A sharp metallic ring echoes through the air as a polished sword is drawn from its sheath with deadly intent. The brainwashed knights quickly advance and point their sharp blades directly at our protagonist. Even as they struggle against her mental control, they are forced to step forward and corner him completely. With cold steel resting dangerously close to his neck, our boy can feel the sweat dripping down his face. One wrong move means instant death. She looks at him with a triumphant smile, declaring that his only way out of this situation is to cooperate with her demands. Instead of pleading for mercy, our boy opens his mouth to speak. He has one secret weapon left, and it is time to use it. She remains smugly confident, believing she has won. She has no idea what kind of information he is about to drop. Standing with blades at his throat, our boy starts recounting a hidden story from the past. He speaks with absolute certainty, completely shifting the dynamic. Her smug expression begins to falter as she listens to his words. She did not expect him to know anything about these highly classified events. He brings up the legendary tale of a woman who possessed a mystical glowing jewel. The story is famous, but he knows the dark secret behind it. He describes the glowing blue gemstone necklace that this mysterious woman wore. It was said to be a symbol of her eternal life and power. But without any warning, the beautiful blue gemstone suddenly turned pitch black and shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. Our boy narrows his eyes as he carefully calculates his next move in this dangerous game of wits. He knows that one wrong step will lead to his immediate demise. The official records claim that after the tragedy, she was finally laid to rest in her distant homeland, far to the east. With a calm and steady voice, our boy drops the ultimate truth bomb. He tells her straight up that part of that story is a complete lie. The sheer confidence in his eyes leaves her completely speechless. He has successfully flipped the script and grabbed her full undivided attention. Now she has no choice but to listen. Even with 2 deadly blades still pointed at him, our protagonist has completely taken control of the entire room. This sudden departure left the young prince completely abandoned in the cold imperial palace, forced to grow up under a heavy shadow of resentment. The blonde lady questioned his feelings, asking if he still resented his birth mother. He calmly admitted that he did not even know the answer to that question himself. Reaching into his shirt, he decided it was time to reveal what he had been hiding. Night after night, he had kept this secret close to his chest, waiting for the right moment. He pulled out a stunning dark gem necklace that shimmered with a mysterious power. This single item held the key to unlocking the truth behind everything. As he drops the necklace onto the table, he admits that looking at the dark gem night after night became strangely fascinating to him, leaving his sister completely stunned. Even with guards hovering nearby with their weapons drawn, our boy did not show a single hint of fear. He calmly reached down to inspect the disputed necklace. The elegant blonde woman maintains a calm expression while questioning him about the missing gemstone. She is trying to see if he will slip up and reveal what he actually knows. Sensing the shift in the room, the guards slowly lowered their weapons. The threat was temporarily gone, but the atmosphere remained incredibly thick. Suddenly, her eyes began to glow with a bright blue light as she activated her magic. She whispered a single command to erase his memories and regain control. The magical energy flared up, hitting the wall behind him with a sharp cracking sound. But her spell did not seem to have the desired effect. He just stood there completely unaffected by her magic. She took a step back, her mind racing as she wondered if her mind control spell had actually failed for the first time. She quickly tried a different approach, stepping closer and gently taking his hands in hers with a warm, fake smile. It was a desperate attempt to manipulate him through affection. She steps directly into his personal space to intimidate him, but our boy keeps his guard up. He begins to wonder if she is just playing mind games to break his focus. He knew it was only natural for her to grow suspicious when her overwhelming mind control magic suddenly stopped working on him. He had to play along to avoid raising more alarms. His thoughts drifted back to a dark and dangerous memory from a completely different time and place. A massive roaring waterfall flowed through a lush green valley as someone desperately searched the area. They wondered if a certain target had actually died in the crash. Deep inside a dark cave, an old gray-haired commander was gritting his teeth in absolute agony. He was covered in dirt and blood, his face twisted in pain. His fancy military uniform was torn and battered, with medals of honor still pinned to his chest, showing his high status. The injured officer in the fancy military uniform trembles in fear as he cowers against the rocky wall. He can barely stand up as a terrifying presence looms directly over him. A mysterious hooded figure stood over him, holding a sharp sword pointed directly at his chest. The commander cried out that his right leg was broken, hoping for some mercy. Staring at the cold steel of the blade, he could only focus on his shattered leg, knowing he could not escape. The hooded warrior looked down with cold, glowing yellow eyes, showing absolutely zero emotion. It was clear that he was not here to negotiate. The old commander noticed that the boy had a flawless stance, and his sword point was razor sharp. This was the posture of a highly trained killer. Panic completely seized the old man as he threw his hands up, begging the young warrior to wait before striking. Glaring down at his victim, the young swordsman remarked that the commander must not have been awake for very long. His voice was cold and steady. The vast difference in power between the two was clear, as the old soldier cowered like a helpless animal on the cave floor. The commander realized the boy was talking about him and the water sphere used during the prince's execution. A wave of dread washed over him as he put the pieces together. He desperately searched his belt and pockets, hoping to find the magical artifact that could save his life. His eye widened in sheer terror as he realized the truth of his dire situation. Desperate to save his own skin, the trembling officer quickly makes an excuse to buy himself some more time. He insists that the item they are looking for is no longer in his possession. His trembling hand pressed against the dirty ground as all hope of survival began to fade away. He rationalized that the item must have fallen away and been lost during the chaotic execution scene. Unmoved by his excuses, the hooded boy slowly drew his sword. The cowering commander desperately rambled on, claiming he lost the artifact while lying collapsed and blood-soaked nearby. He thrust the cold steel right in front of the old man's face, the brilliant reflection of the blade highlighting the absolute terror in his eyes. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the dark cave as the commander realized his life hung by a thread. Our protagonist held his blade right against the old officer's throat, ready to end things. The veteran could only stare up in absolute terror as the cold steel pressed against his neck. With a cold stare, our boy asked him if he was truly loyal to the aberrant empire. The question hung in the air, carrying a heavy weight that demanded an immediate answer. Sweat poured down the old soldier's face as he struggled to find his voice. The sheer pressure radiating from our boy left him completely paralyzed and unable to move. Stuttering in absolute shock, the old man gasped out the name Amica, as if he could not believe who was standing right in front of him. Memories suddenly began to flash through the veteran's mind as he stared at his attacker. The realization of who this hooded warrior was sent a cold shiver down his spine. He tried to speak, but only a desperate stutter escaped his lips. The overwhelming weight of the past seemed to crush his chest, making it impossible to breathe. He recalled the dark days when they encountered people who looked like nothing more than local vagrants. It was a bleak memory of a harsh and unforgiving world. The veteran remembered walking past a lifeless body collapsed on the cold cobblestone street. In those grim times, scenes like that were incredibly common, and nobody even bothered to stop or help. It was a brutal reality where life held absolutely no value. He remembered a young child staring back at him with dirt and blood smeared across his face. Those wide, traumatized eyes had captured the sheer horror of their bleak environment. The old man remembered the bitter thoughts of a cold, imperial dog who would not even blink while his own aide lay at death's door. It was a sickening display of pure loyalty to a corrupt throne. A sinister young soldier with glowing eyes had stood there holding a weapon with a terrifying smile. This young monster possessed a twisted devotion that made him completely heartless. The memory of that dark uniform and the heavy gear came rushing back with vivid detail. It served as a grim reminder of the absolute authority they once served. The old soldier remembered the chilling promise that his own son would eventually grow up to become an equally loyal hound for the Empire. The dark void of his memories felt suffocating as the blood from the past seemed to stain everything he had ever fought to protect. Back in the present, the veteran stared intensely at the blade hovering right before his face. The reflection of his past sins shone clearly in his trembling eyes. His mind drifted to the one person he cherished more than anything else in this world, his beloved son Flynn. Years ago, he had been a proud and powerful figure standing tall in his pristine imperial uniform. He held his head high, believing he was doing the right thing. His young son Flynn had looked up at him with pure admiration in his eyes. To the boy, his father was a legendary hero who could do no wrong. He had taken his son to the grand hall of the palace, pointing at the massive statue of the imperial hero. He had commanded Flynn to follow in his footsteps to become the ultimate sword of the empire and cut down every heretic that threatened their land. The old officer closed his eyes for a brief moment as the weight of those words fully sank in. The foolish ideals of his youth had brought them to this tragic point. Looking directly at our protagonist with glowing blue eyes, he declared that he knew absolutely nothing of loyalty to the aberrant empire anymore. Even with a deadly blade aimed straight at his chest, the seasoned commander refuses to back down. Those prestigious imperial medals mean absolutely nothing to him compared to protecting his son.